Oh, Mitakuye Ase. Hello, all my relations. How y'all doing? My name is the Lucky Coyote, and today we are going to be reading some more Brothers Grimm. This first one is going to be The Straw, the Coal, and the Bean. And then we'll go into some other ones after that. But let's see now. What happened today? Today we almost got done with the roof. We have one more day doing the roof of this house, and then we move on to the next one, probably on Tuesday. So that's good. And also we don't have to paper this roof, which is such a big help. Oh my God, you have no idea yet. I hate papering roofs. It sucks. It's just tossing a bunch of weather paper over top of the roof just so, stuff doesn't leak in. And then the actual shingles go on after that. But this roof is really freaking steep. So as I've said in a previous stream, the steepest part is a 9. So for 6 feet, from 6 feet in, it goes up 9 feet. And then the rest of the roof is a 7 hip. So that's, every 6 feet out, 7 feet up. So it's a little more than a 45 degree. And then the other one's sitting at about like a 60 degree. So it's a little difficult to climb, but not impossible. Which is why I wear comfortable shoes. But still, that rains hell upon your ankles. But, I mean, it works out. So, let's get to some stories. That is not the correct story title. 1 second. There we are. There's the story title. All right. So let us get to her. The Straw, the Coal, and the Bean by the Brothers Grimm. In a certain village there dwelt a poor old woman who had gathered a dish of beans which she wished to cook. So she made a fire upon the hearth, and, that it might burn the quicker, she lighted it with a handful of straw. And, as she shook the beans up in the saucepan, one fell out unperceived, and came down upon the ground near a straw. Soon after, glowing coal burst out of the fire, and fell just by these two. Then the straw began to say, "My dear friend, whence do you come?" The coal replied, "By good luck I have sprung out of the fire, and if I had not jumped away by force, my death had been certain, and I should have been reduced to ashes." The bean continued, "I also have got away with the whole skin, but had the old woman put me in the pot with the others, I should have been boiled to pieces, as my comrades are." "Would a better fate have fallen to my share?" said the straw, "for the old woman had suffocated in fire and smoke all my brothers. 60 has she put on at once, and deprived of life, happily I slipped between her fingers." "But what shall we do now?" asked the coal. "I think," answered the bean, "since we have so luckily escaped death, we will join in partnership. and keep together like good companions, lest a new misfortune overtake us. Let us wander forth and travel into a strange country." This proposition pleased the two others, and they set out together on their travels. Presently they came to a little stream, over which there was no bridge or path, and they did not know how they should get over. The straw gave good advice, and said, "I will lay myself across, so that you may cross upon me, as upon a bridge." So the straw stretched itself from one bank to the other, and the coal, which was of a fiery nature, tripped lightly upon the newly built bridge. But when it came to the middle of it, and heard the water running along beneath it, it was frightened and stood still, no daring to go further. The straw, however, began to burn, broke in two, and fell into the stream, and the coal, slipping after, hissed as it reached the water and gave up the ghost. The bean, which had prudently remained upon the shore, was forced to laugh at this accident, and the joke being so good, it laughed so immoderately that it burst itself. Now they would all have been done for alike, if a tailor who was out on his wanderings had not just then, by great good luck, sat himself down near the stream. Having commiserating heart,
out there in the audience, people!
Classy Fish, thank you for following. Thank you for the follow. I was just about to turn those alerts off, too, because the story is almost over. Having a commiserating heart, he took out the needle and thread, and sewed the bean together. The bean thanked him exceedingly, but as the tailor used black thread, it has happened since that time that every bean has a black seam. Thus ends the straw, the coal, and the bean. Next one is another famous one, which a lot of you should know. Cinderella. So let us get to it. Cinderella by the brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, the wife of a certain rich man fell very ill, and as she felt her end drawing nigh, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "My dear child, be pious and good, and then the good God will always protect you, and I will look down upon you from heaven and think of you." Soon afterwards she closed her eyes and died. Every day the maiden went to her mother's grave and wept over it, and she continued to be good and pious. But when the winter came, the snow made a white covering over the grave, and in the springtime, when the sun had withdrawn this covering, the father took to himself another wife. This wife brought home with her 2 daughters, who were beautiful and fair in the face, but treacherous and wicked at heart. Then an unfortunate era began in the poor stepchild's life. "Shall the stupid goose sit in the parlor with us?" said the 2 daughters. "They who would eat bread must earn it. Out with the kitchen maid!" So they took off her fine clothes and put upon her an old gray cloak, and gave her wooden shoes for her feet. "See how the once proud princess is decked out now," said they. And they led her mockingly into the kitchen. Then she was obliged to work hard from morning to night, and to go out early to fetch water, to make fire, and cook and scour. The sisters treated her besides with every possible insult, derided her, and shook the peas and beans into the ashes so that she had to pick them out again. At night, when she was tired, she had no bed to lie on, but was forced to sit in the ashes on the hearth. And because she looked dirty through this, they named her Cinderella. One day it happened that the father wanted to go to the fair, so he asked his 2 daughters what he should bring them. "Some beautiful dresses," said one. "Pearls and precious stones," replied the other. "But you, Cinderella," said he, "what will you have?" "The first bough, father, that knocks against your hat on your way homewards. Break it off for me," she replied. So he bought the fine dresses and the pearls and precious stones for his 2 stepdaughters, and on his return, as he rode through a green thicket, a hazel bough touched his hat, which he broke off and took with him. As soon as he got home, he gave his stepdaughters what they had wished for, and to Cinderella he gave the hazel branch. She thanked him very much, and going to her mother's grave, she planted the branch on it, and wept so long that her tears fell and watered it, so that it grew and became a beautiful tree. Thrice a day Cinderella went beneath it to weep and pray, and each time a little white bird flew on the tree, and if she wished aloud, then the little bird threw down to her whatever she wished for. After a time it fell out that the king appointed a festival, which was to last 3 days, and to which all the beautiful maidens in the country were invited, from whom his son was to choose a bride. When the 2 stepdaughters heard that they might also appear, they were very glad, and, calling Cinderella, they said, "Comb our hair, brush our shoes, and fasten our buckles, for we are going to the festival at the king's palace." Cinderella obeyed, crying, because she wished to go with them to the dance, so she asked her stepmother whether she would allow her. "You, Cinderella," said she, "you are covered with dust and dirt. Will you go to the festival? You have no clothes or shoes, and how can you dance?" But as she urged her request, the mother said at last, "I have now shaken into the ashes a tub full of beans. If you have picked them up again in 2 hours, you shall go." Then the maiden left the room and went out at the back door into the garden and called out, "You tame pigeons and doves, and all you birds of heaven, come and help me to gather the good into the tub, and the bad ones you may eat." Presently, in at the kitchen window came 2 white pigeons, and after them the doves, and soon all the birds under heaven flew chirping in and down upon the ashes. Then they began to pick, and gathered all the good seeds into the tub, and scarcely an hour had passed when all was completed, and the birds flew away again. Then the maiden took the tub to the stepmother, rejoicing at the thought that she might now go to the festival. But the stepmother said, "No, Cinderella, you have no clothes, and cannot dance. You will only be laughed at." As she began to cry, the stepmother said, "If you could pick up quite clean 2 tubs of beans which I throw amongst the ashes in 1 hour, you shall accompany them." And she thought to herself, "She will never manage it." As soon as the 2 tubs had been shot into the ashes, Cinderella went out the back door into the garden and called out as before, "You tame pigeons and doves, and all you birds under heaven, come and help me to gather the good ones into the tubs, and the bad ones you may eat." Presently, in at the kitchen window came 2 white pigeons, and after them the doves, and soon all the birds under heaven flew chirping in and down upon the ashes. Then they began to pick, and gathered all the good seeds into the tubs, and scarcely had half an hour passed before all was picked up, and off they flew again. The maiden now took the tubs to the stepmother, rejoicing at the thought that she could go to the festival. But the mother said, "It does not help you a bit. You cannot go with us, for you have no clothes and cannot dance. We should be ashamed of you." Thereupon she turned her back upon the maiden and hastened away with her 2 proud daughters. As there was no one at home, Cinderella went to her mother's grave under the hazel tree and said, "Rustle and shake yourself, dear tree, and silver and gold throw down to me." Then the bird threw down a dress of gold and silver, and silken slippers ornamented with silver. These Cinderella put on in great haste, and then she went to the ball. Her sisters and stepmother did not know her at all, and took her for some foreign princess, as she looked so beautiful in her golden dress. For of Cinderella they thought not but that she was sitting at home picking the beans out of the ashes. Presently the prince came up to her, and, taking her by the hand, led her to the dance. He would not dance with anyone else, and even would not let go her hand, so that when anyone else asked her to dance, he said, "She is my partner." They danced till evening. When she wished to go home, the prince said, "I will go with you and see you safe," for he wanted to see to whom the maiden belonged. She flew away from him, however, and sprang into the pigeon house. So the prince waited till the father came, whom he told that the strange maiden had run into the pigeon house. Then the stepmother thought, "Could it be Cinderella?" And they brought an axe wherewith the prince might cut open the door, but no one was found within. And when they came into the house, there lay Cinderella in her dirty clothes among the ashes, and an oil lamp was burning in the chimney, for she had jumped quickly out on the other side of the pigeon house, and had run into the hazel tree, where she had taken off her fine clothes and laid them on the grave. And the bird had taken them again, and afterwards she had put on her little grey cloak and seated herself among the ashes in the kitchen. The next day, when the festival was renewed, and her stepmother and sisters had set out again, Cinderella went to the hazel tree and sang as before, "Rustle and shake yourself, dear tree, and silver and gold throw down to me." Then the bird threw down a much more splendid dress than the former, and when the maiden appeared at the ball, every one was astonished at her beauty. The prince, however, who had waited till she came, took her hand and would dance with no one else, and if others came and asked, he replied as before, "She is my partner." As soon as evening came, she wished to depart, and the prince followed her, wanting to see into whose house she went, but she sprang away from him and ran to the garden behind the house. Therein stood a fine large tree, on which hung the most beautiful pears, and the boughs rustled as though a squirrel was among them, but the prince could not see whence the noise proceeded. He waited, however, till the father came, and told him, "The strange maiden has escaped from me, and I think she has climbed up into this tree." The father thought to himself, "Can it be Cinderella?" and taking an axe, he chopped down the tree, but there was no one on it. When they went into the kitchen, there lay Cinderella among the ashes as before, for she had sprung down on the other side of the tree, and having taken her beautiful clothes again to the bird upon the hazel tree, she had put on once more her old grey cloak. The third day, when the stepmother and her sisters had set out, Cinderella went again to her mother's grave, and said, "Rustle and shake yourself, dear tree, and silver and gold throw down to me." Then the bird threw down to her a dress which was more splendid and glittering than she had ever had before, and the slippers were all golden. When she arrived at the ball, they knew not what to say for wonderment, and the prince danced with her alone as at first, and replied to everyone who asked her hand, "She is my partner." As soon as evening came, she wished to go, and as the prince followed her, she ran away so quickly that he could not overtake her. But he had contrived a stratagem, and spread the whole way with pitch, so that it happened, as the maiden ran, that her left slipper came off. The prince took it up, and saw it was small and graceful, and quite golden. So the following morning he went with it to the father, and said, "My bride shall be no other than she whose foot this golden slipper fits." The two sisters were glad of this, for they had beautiful feet, and the elder went with it into her chamber to try it on, while her mother stood by. She could not, however, get her great toe into it, and the shoe was much too small. But the mother, reaching a knife, said, "Cut off your toe, for if you are queen, you need not go any longer on foot." The maiden cut it off, and squeezed her foot into the shoe, and, concealing the pain she felt, went down to the prince. Then he placed her as his bride upon his horse, and rode off. And as they passed by the grave, there sat two little doves upon the hazel tree, singing, "Backwards peep, there's blood upon the shoe's too small, and she behind is not the bride for you." Then the prince looked back and saw the blood flowing. So he turned his horse back and took the false bride home again, saying she was not the right one. Then the other sister must needs fit on the shoe. So she went to her chamber and got her toes nicely into the shoe, but the heel was too large. The mother, reaching a knife, said, "Cut a piece off your heel, for when you become queen you need not go any longer on foot." She cut a piece off her heel, squeezed her foot into the shoe, and, concealing the pain she felt, went down to the prince. Then he put her upon his horse as his bride, and rode off. And as they passed the hazel tree, there sat two little doves, who sang, "Backwards peep, there's blood upon the shoe's too small, and she behind is not the bride for you."
Princess and idiot.
Then he looked behind, and saw the blood trickling from her shoe, and that the stocking was dyed quite red. So he turned his horse back, and took the false bride home again, saying, "Neither is the one the right maiden. Have you no other daughter?" "No," replied the father, "except a little Cinderella, daughter of my deceased wife, who cannot possibly be the bride." The prince asked that she might be fetched, but the stepmother said, "Oh no, she is much too dirty. I dare not let her be seen." but the prince would have his way. So Cinderella was called, and she, first washing her hands and face, went in and curtsied to the prince, who gave her the golden shoe. Cinderella sat down on a stool, and, taking off her heavy wooden shoes, put on the slipper, which fitted her to a shade. And as she stood up, the prince looked in her face, and, recognizing the beautiful maiden with whom he had danced, exclaimed, "This is my rightful bride." The stepmother and the two sisters were amazed and white with rage, but the prince took Cinderella upon his horse and rode away, and as they came up to the hazel tree, the two little white doves sang, "Backwards peep, there's no blood on the shoe. It fits so nice, and she behind is the true bride for you." And as they finished, they flew down and lighted upon Cinderella's shoulders, and there they remained, and the wedding was celebrated with great festivities, and the two sisters were smitten with blindness as a punishment for their wickedness. Thus ends Cinderella. All right, this next story is entitled The Riddle. A little bit of afterthoughts for Cinderella. There's a lot of absentee fathers in these stories, where they're just like, all right, yeah, I guess I'll go with whatever the wife says, or they're just there as like, yeah, I really don't care what happens to one of my daughters. Whatever, I don't care for my children. All right, so let us continue with The Riddle by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time there was a king's son who had a mind to see the world, so he set forth and took no one with him but a faithful servant. One day he came into a great forest, and when evening drew on, he could find no shelter, and did not know where to pass the night. Just then he perceived a maiden who was going towards a little cottage, and as he approached, he saw that she was young and beautiful. So he asked her whether he and his servant could find a welcome in the cottage for the night. "Yes, certainly," replied the maiden in a sorrowful voice. "You can, but I advise you not to enter." "Why not?" asked the prince. The maiden sighed and answered, "My stepmother practices wicked arts, and she acts not hospitably to strangers." He perceived now that he has come to a witch's cottage, but because it was very dark and he could go no further, he went in, for he was not at all afraid. The old woman was sitting in an armchair by the fire and looked at the strangers out of her red eyes. "Good evening," she muttered, appearing very friendly. "Sit yourselves down and rest." Then she poked up the fire on which the little pot was boiling. The daughter warned them both to be cautious and neither to eat or drink anything, for the old woman brewed bad drinks. So they slept quietly till morning, and as they made ready for their departure, and the prince was already mounted on horseback, the old witch said, "Wait a bit, I will bring you a parting draught." While she went for it, the prince rode away, but the servant, who had to buckle his saddle, was left alone when she came with the draught. "Take that to thy master," she said. But at the same moment the glass cracked, and the poison spirted on the horse. And so strong was it that the poor animal fell backward, dead. The servant ran after his master and told him what had occurred. But as he would not leave the saddle behind, he went back to fetch it. As he came to the dead horse, he saw a crow perched upon it, feeding himself. "Who knows whether we shall meet with anything better today?" said the servant, and, killing the crow, he took it with him. The whole day long they journeyed on in the forest, but could not get out of it. And at the approach of night, finding an inn, they entered it. The servant gave the crow to the host, that he might cook it for their supper. But they had fallen into a den of thieves, and in the gloom of night 12 ruffians came, intending to rob and murder the strangers. Before they began, however, they sat down to table, and the host and the witch joined them, and then they all partook of a dish of pottage, in which the flesh of the crow was boiled. Scarcely had they eaten 2 morsels apiece when they all fell down dead, for the poison which had killed the horse was impaired to the flesh of the crow. There was now no one left in the house but the daughter of the host, who seemed to be honest and had no share in the wicked deeds. She opened all the doors to the prince and showed him the heaped-up treasure, but the prince said she might keep it all, for he would have none of it, and so rode on further with his servant. After they had wandered a long way in the wood, they came to a city where dwelt a beautiful but haughty princess, who had declared that whoever propounded to her riddle which she could not solve should be her husband. But if she solved it, he must have his head cut off. 3 days was the time given to consider, but she was always so sharp that she discovered the proposed riddle before the appointed time. 9 suitors had been sacrificed in this way when the prince arrived, and, being blinded with her great beauty, resolved to stake his life upon her. So he went before her and proposed his riddle, namely, "What is this? 1 killed no one, and yet killed 12. She knew not what it was, and thought, but she could not make it out. And, although she searched through all her riddle books, she could find nothing to help her. In short, her wisdom was at an end. Since she knew not how to help herself, she bade her maid slip into the sleeping room of the prince, and there listen to his dreams, thinking perhaps he might talk in his sleep and unfold the riddle. The bold servant, however, had put himself instead of his master into the bed, and when the servant came into the room, he tore off the cloak in which she had wrapped herself, and hunted her out with a rod. The second night, the princess sent her chambermaid to see if she could be more fortunate in listening, but the servant snatched her mantle away, and haunted her away with a rod. The third night, the prince himself thought he should be safe, and so he lay in his own bed, and the princess herself came, having on a dark grey cloak, and sat herself down by him. When she thought he was asleep and dreaming, she spoke to him, hoping he would answer as many do. But he was awake, and heard and understood everything very well. First she asked, 1 kills none, "What is that?" He answered, "A crow which ate of a dead and poisoned horse, and died of it." Further, she asked, "And yet killed 12. What is that?" 12 robbers who partook of the crow and died from eating it." As soon as she knew the riddle, she tried to slip away, but he held her mantle fast so that she left it behind. The following morning, the princess announced that she had discovered the riddle, and bade the 12 judges come, and she would solve it before them. The prince, however, requested a hearing for himself, and said, "She has stolen in upon me by night and asked me, or she would never have found it out." The judges said, "Bring us a witness." Then the servant brought up the 3 mantles, and when the judges saw the dark grey cloak which the princess used to wear, they said, "Let the cloak be adorned with gold and silver, that it may be a wedding garment." Thus ends the riddle.
The games.
This next tale is entitled Old Mother Frost. Mother to Jack Frost.
To Elsa.
Yes, on to Elsa and Anna. Old Mother Frost by the brothers Grimm. There was once a widow who had 2 daughters, one of whom was beautiful and industrious, the other ugly and lazy. She showed more love, however, to the ugly one, because she was her own daughter, but she made the other do all the hard work and live like a kitchen maid. The poor maiden was forced out daily on the high road, and had to sit by a well and spin so much that the blood ran from her fingers. Once it happened that her spindle became quite covered with blood, so, kneeling down by the well, she tried to wash it off. But, unhappily, it fell out of her hands into the water. She ran crying to her stepmother and told her misfortune, but she scolded her terribly and behaved very cruelly, and at last said, "Since you have let your spindle fall in, you must go yourself fetch it out again." Then the maiden went back to the well, not knowing what to do, and, in her distress of mind, she jumped into the well to fetch the spindle out. Presently she lost all consciousness, and when she came to herself again, she found herself in a beautiful meadow, where the sun was shining, and many thousands of flowers blooming around her. She got up and walked along till she came to a baker's, where the oven was full of bread, which cried out, draw me, or I shall be burnt. I have been baked long enough." So she went up, and, taking the bread shovel, drew out one loaf after the other. Then she walked on further, and came to an apple tree, whose fruit hung very thick, and which exclaimed, shake us, we apples are all ripe." So she shook the tree till the apples fell down like rain, and, when none were left on, she gathered them all together in a heap, and went further. At last she came to a cottage, out of which an old woman was peeping, who had such very large teeth that the maiden was frightened and ran away. The old woman, however, called her back, saying, "What are you afraid of, my child? Stop with me. If you will put all things in order in my house, then shall all go well with you. Only you must take care that you make my bed as well, and shake it tremendously, so that the feathers fly. Then it snows upon the earth. I am Old Mother Frost." As the old woman spoke so kindly, the maiden took courage and consented to engage in her service. Now everything made her very contented, and she had always shook the bed so industriously that the feathers blew down like flakes of snow. Therefore her life was a happy one, and there were no evil words, and she had roast and baked meat every day. For some time she remained with the old woman, but all at once she became very sad, and did not herself know what was the matter. At last she found she was homesick, and although she fared 1,000 times better than when she was at home, still she longed to go. So she told her mistress, "I wish to go home. However well off I am down here, I cannot stay longer. I must return." The mistress replied, "It appeared to me that you wanted to go home, and, since you have served me so truly, I will fetch you up again myself." So saying, she took her by the hand, and led her before to a great door, which she undid, and, when the maiden was just beneath it, a great shower of gold fell, and a great deal stuck to her, so that she was covered over and over with gold. "That you must have for your industry," said the old woman, giving her the spindle which had fallen into the well. Thereupon the door was closed, and the maiden found herself upon the earth, not far from her mother's house. And, as she came into the court, the cock sat upon the house and called, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Our maiden's come home again!" Then she went in to her mother, and, because she was so covered with gold, she was well received. The maiden related all that had happened, and, when the mother heard how she had come by these great riches, she wished her ugly, lazy daughter to try her luck. So she was forced to sit down by the well and spin, and, in order that her spindle might become bloody, she pricked her finger by running a thorn into it, and then, throwing the spindle into the well, she jumped in after it. Then, like the other, she came upon the beautiful meadow, and travelled on the same path. When she arrived at the baker's, the bread called out, "Draw me out, or I shall be burnt. I have been baked long enough." But she answered, "I have no wish to make myself dirty about you," and so went on. Soon she came to the apple tree, which called out, shake me, my apples are all quite ripe." But she answered, "You will do well to come to me. Perhaps one will fall on my head." And so she went on further. When she came to the old Mother Frost's house, she was not afraid of the teeth, for she had been warned, and so she engaged herself to her. The first day she set to work in earnest, was very industrious, and obeyed her mistress in all she said to her, for she thought about the gold which she would present to her. On the second day, however, she began to idle. On the third, still more so, and then she would not get up of a morning. She did not make the beds either, as she ought, and the feathers did not fly. So the old woman got tired, and dismissed her from her service, which pleased the lazy one very well. But she thought, "Now the gold shower will come." Her mistress led her to the door, but, When she was beneath it, instead of gold, a tub full of pitch was poured down upon her. "That is the reward for your service," said Old Mother Frost, and shut the door to. Then came Lazy Bones home, but she was quite covered with pitch, and the cock upon the house, when he saw her, cried, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Our dirty maids come home again!" But the pitch stuck to her, and, as long as she lived, would never come off again. Thus ends Old Mother Frost. This next one is entitled The Seven Crows. As Suzu caws in the background. Yes, always do your job.
Here, pizza.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so let us continue with The Seven Crows by the Brothers Grimm. There was a man who had 7 sons, but never a daughter, although he wished very much for one. At last his wife promised him another child, and when it was born, lo, it was a daughter. Their happiness was great, but the child was so weak and small that, on account of its delicate health, it had to be baptized immediately. The father sent one of his sons hastily to a spring in order to fetch some water, but the other 6 would run as well, and as each strove to be the first to fill the pitcher, between them all fell into the water. They stood by now knowing what to do, and none of them dared to go home. As they did not come back, the father became impatient, saying, "They have forgotten all about it in a game of play, the godless youths." Soon he became anxious lest the child should die unbaptized, and in his haste he exclaimed, "I would they were all changed into crows." Scarcely were the words out of his mouth when he heard a whirring over his head, and looking up he saw 7 coal-black crows flying over the house. The parents could not recall their curse, and grieved very much for their lost sons, but they comforted themselves in some measure with their dear daughter, who soon grew strong and became more and more beautiful every day. For a long time she did not know she had any brothers, for the parents were careful not to mention them. But one day, accidentally, she overheard the people talking of her and saying, "She is certainly very beautiful, but still the guilt of her 7 brothers hangs on her." This made her very sad, and she went to her parents and asked whether she had any brothers, and whether they were gone. The old people durst no longer keep their secret, but said it was the decree of heaven, and her birth had been the unhappy cause. Now the maiden daily accused herself, and thought how she could again deliver her brothers. She had neither rest nor quiet, until she at last set out secretly and journeyed into the wide world to seek out her brothers, and to free them wherever they were, cost what it might. She took nothing with her but a ring of her parents for remembrance, a loaf of bread for hunger's sake, a bottle of water for thirst's sake, and a little stool for weariness. Now on and on went the maiden further and further, even to the world's end. Then she came to the sun, but he was too hot and fearful, and burnt up little children. So she ran hastily away to the moon, but she was too cold and even wicked-looking, and said, I smell man's flesh. So she ran away quickly and went to the stars, who were friendly and kind to her, each one sitting upon his own little seat. But the morning star was standing up and gave her a crooked bone, saying, If you have not this bone, you cannot unlock the glass castle where your brothers are. The maiden took the bone and wrapped it well up in a handkerchief, and then on she went again, till she came at last to the glass castle. The door was closed, and she looked therefore for the little bone, but when she unwrapped her handkerchief, it was empty. She had lost the present of the good star. What was she to do now? She wished to save her brothers, and she had no key to the glass castle. The good sister bent her little finger and put it in the door, and, luckily, it unlocked it. As soon as she entered, a little dwarf came towards her, who said, My child, what do you seek? I seek my brothers, the 7 crows, she replied. The dwarf answered, My lord crows are not at home, but if you wait until their return, come in and sit down. Thereupon the little dwarf carried in the food of the 7 crows upon 7 dishes and in 7 cups, and the maiden ate a little piece of each dish and drank a little out of every cup. But in the last cup she dropped the ring which she had brought with her. All at once she heard a whirring and cawing in the air, and the dwarf said, My lord crows are now flying home. Presently they came in and prepared to eat and drink, each seeking his own dish and cup. Then one said to the other, Who has been eating off of my dish? Who has been drinking out of my cup? There has been a human mouth here. When the 7th came to the bottom of his cup, the little ring rolled out. He looked at it and recognized it as a ring of his parents, and said, God grant that our sister be here, then we are saved. As the maiden, who had stood behind the door watching, heard this wish, she came forward, and immediately all the crows received again their human forms, and embraced and kissed one another, and then they all went joyfully home. Thus ends the 7 crows. At least they're smart. Yeah. Yeah, crows are pretty smart. So, this next one is another famous one, which everyone should know, or at least the vast majority of them. Vast majority of people should know. Little Red Riding Hood by the brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there lived a sweet little girl who was beloved by everyone who saw her. But her grandmother was so excessively fond of her that she never knew when to give the child enough. One day, the grandmother presented the little girl with a red velvet riding hood, and, as it fitted her very well, she would never wear anything else, and so she was called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, Come, Red Riding Hood, there is a piece of nice meat and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and will relish them. Make haste before she gets up. Go quietly and carefully, and do not run, lest you should fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. When you go into her room, do not forget to say, 'Good morning,' and do not look about in all the corners." "I will do everything as you wish," replied Red Riding Hood, taking her mother's hand. The grandmother dwelt far away in the wood, half an hour's walk from the village, and as Little Red Riding Hood entered among the trees, she met a wolf, but she did not know what a malicious beast it was, and so she was not at all afraid. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," he said. "Many thanks, Wolf," said she. "Whither away so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's," she replied. "What are you carrying under your apron?" "Meat and wine," she answered. "Yesterday we baked the meat, that grandmother, who is ill and weak, might have something nice and strengthening." "Where does your grandmother live?" asked the wolf. "A good quarter of an hour's walk further in the forest. The cottage stands under the three great oak trees. Near it are some nut bushes, by which you will easily know it." But the wolf thought to himself, "She is a nice, tender thing, and will taste better than the old woman. I must act craftily, that I may snap them both up." Presently he came up again to Little Red Riding Hood, and said, "Just look at the beautiful flowers which grow around you. Why do you not look about you? I believe you don't hear how beautifully the birds sing. You walk on as if you were going to school. See how merry everything is around you in the forest." So Little Red Riding Hood opened her eyes, and when she saw how the sunbeams glanced and danced through the trees, and what splendid flowers were blooming in her path, she thought, "If I take my grandmother a fresh nosegay, she will be very pleased, and it is so very early that I can, even then, get there in good time." And running into the forest, she looked about for flowers, but when she had once begun, she did not know how to leave off, and kept going deeper and deeper among the trees in search of some more beautiful flower. The wolf, however, ran straight to the house of the old grandmother and knocked at the door. "Who's there?" asked the old lady. "Only Little Red Riding Hood, bringing you some meat and wine. Please open the door," replied the wolf. "Lift up the latch," cried the grandmother. "I am too weak to get up." So the wolf lifted the latch, and the door flew open, and, jumping without a word on the bed, he gobbled up the poor old lady. Then he put on her clothes, and tied her cap over his head, got into the bed, and drew the blankets over him. All this time Red Riding Hood was still gathering flowers, and when she had plucked as many as she could carry, she remembered her grandmother and made haste to the cottage. She wondered very much to see the door wide open, and when she got into the room, she began to feel very ill, and exclaimed, "How sad I feel! I wish I had not come today." Then she said, "Good morning," but received no answer. So she went up to the bed and drew back the curtains, and there lay her grandmother, as she thought, with the cap drawn half over her eyes, looking very fiercely. "Oh, grandmother," What great ears you have!" "The better to hear you with," was the reply. "And what great eyes you have!" "The better to see with." "And what great hands you have!" "The better to touch you with." "But, grandmother, what great teeth you have!" "The better to eat you with." And scarcely were the words out of his mouth when the wolf made a spring out of the bed and swallowed up poor Little Red Riding Hood. As soon as the wolf had thus satisfied his appetite, he laid himself down again in the bed and began to snore very loudly. A huntsman passing by overheard him and thought, "How loudly the old woman snores! I must see if she wants anything." So he stepped into the cottage, and when he came to the bed, he saw the wolf lying in it. "What? Do I find you here, you old sinner? I have long sought you," he exclaimed, taking aim with his gun. Then, just as he was about to fire, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that he might still save her. So instead of firing, he took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the belly of the sleeping wolf. After 2 snips, he saw the Little Red Riding Hood, and after 2 more snips, the little girl sprang out, crying, "Oh, how frightened I have been! It was so dark inside the wolf." And then the old grandmother came out, also alive, but scarcely able to breathe. Little Red Riding Hood ran outside and found some big stones, and they put them in the wolf's belly. When he woke up, he tried to run away, but the stones were so heavy that he collapsed and fell dead. Then all 3 were happy. The huntsman skinned the wolf and took the skin. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine Little Red Riding Hood had brought, and felt better at once. As for Little Red Riding Hood, she said to herself, "I will never again leave the path and run into the woods where my mother has told me not to." Some folks say that this story is not the true one, but that one day when Red Riding Hood was taking some baked meats to her grandmother's, a wolf met her and wanted to lead her astray. But she went straight on and told her grandmother that she had met a wolf who wished her good day, but he looked so wickedly out of his great eyes, as if he would have eaten her had she not been on the high road. So the grandmother said, "Let us shut the door, that he may not enter." Soon afterwards came the wolf, who knocked and exclaimed, "I am Red Riding Hood, grandmother. I bring you some roast meat." But they kept quite still and did not open the door, so the wolf, creeping several times around the house, at last jumped on the roof, intending to wait till Red Riding Hood went home in the evening, and then to sneak after her and devour her in the darkness. The old woman, however, saw all that the rascal intended, and as there stood before the door a great stone trough, she said to Little Red Riding Hood, "Take this pail, child. Yesterday I boiled some sausages in this water, so pour it into that stone trough." Red Riding Hood poured many times until the huge trough was quite full. Then the wolf sniffed the smell of the sausages and smacked his lips and wished very much to taste, and at last he stretched his neck too far over, so that he lost his balance and slipped quite off the roof, right into the great trough beneath, wherein he was drowned, and Little Red Riding Hood ran home in high glee, but no one sorrowed for Mr. Wolf. Thus ends Little Red Riding Hood. We're not all malicious beasts. And not all wolves are malicious beasts. They're just dangerous. Coyotes are also not malicious. They're just sneaky. Wily. This next one is entitled The Singing Bone.
Rawr. I'm a monster. Rawr.
So let us begin. The Singing Bone by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, great complaints were made in a certain country of a wild boar, which had laid waste the fields of the peasants, killed the cattle, and often tore to pieces the inhabitants. The king promised a great reward to whoever should free the land of this plague. But the beast was so big and strong that no one durst venture in the neighborhood of the forest where it raged. At last the king allowed it to be proclaimed that whoever should take or kill the wild boar should have his only daughter in marriage. Now there lived in this country 2 brothers, the sons of a poor man, and they each wished to undertake the adventure. The elder, who was bold and brave out of pride, the younger, who was innocent and ignorant from a good heart. They agreed that they might the sooner find the boar, that they should enter the forest on opposite sides. So the elder departed in the evening, and the other on the following morning. When the younger had gone a short way, a little dwarf stepped up to him, holding a black spear in his hand, and said, "I give you this spear because your heart is innocent and good. With it you may boldly attack the boar, who can do you no harm." He thanked the dwarf, and, taking the spear, went forth bravely. In a little while he perceived the wild boar, which ran straight at him. But he held the spear in front of his body, so that, in its blind fury, it rushed on so rashly that its heart was pierced quite through. Then he took the beast upon his shoulders, and went homewards to show it to the king. However, just as he came out on the other side of the forest, there stood where the people were making merry, dancing and drinking. His elder brother was amongst them, exciting his courage by wine, and never thinking at all the boar might be killed by any other than himself. As soon, therefore, as he saw his younger brother coming out of the forest, laden with his booty, his envious and ill-natured heart had no rest. Still he called to him, "Come in here, my dear brother, and rest, and strengthen yourself with a cup of wine." The younger brother, suspecting no evil, went in and related his story to the good little dwarf, who had given him the spear wherewith he had killed the boar. The elder brother detained him till evening, and then they went away together. But when they came in the darkness to a bridge over a stream, the elder, letting his brother pass on till he came to the middle of the bridge, gave him a blow which felled him dead. Then he buried him in the sand below the bridge, and taking the boar, brought it to the king, representing that he had killed it, and so received in marriage the princess. He declared, moreover, that the boar had torn in pieces the body of his younger brother, and, as he did not come back, Everyone believed the tale to be true. But because nothing is hid from God's sight, so also this black deed at last came to light. Many years after, as a peasant was driving his herd across the brook, he saw lying in the sand below a snow-white bone, which he thought would make a good mouthpiece. So he stepped down, took it up, and fashioned it into a mouthpiece for his horn. But as soon as he blew through it for the first time, to the great astonishment of the herdsman, the bone began to sing of itself. My brother slew me and buried my bones under the sand and under the stones. I killed the boar as he came from his lair, but he won the prize of the lady fair. What a wonderful little bone! Exclaimed the herdsman. It sings of itself. I must take it to the king. As soon as he came before the king, it began again to repeat its song, and the king understood it perfectly. So he caused the earth below the bridge to be dug up, and there all the bones of the younger brother came to light. The wicked brother could not deny the deed, and, for his punishment, he was sewed up in a sack and drowned. And the bones of the other brother were placed in a splendid tomb in the churchyard. Thus ends the singing bone. This next tale is the giant with the 3 golden hairs. Giant. There we are. So, let us continue. The Giant with the 3 Golden Hairs by the brothers Grimm. There is a note on this real quick where it mentions a caul, C-A-U-L, which is part of the membrane enclosing the fetus left over the baby's head at birth, once thought to bring good luck. The Giant with the 3 Golden Hairs by the brothers Grimm. There was once upon a time a poor woman whose son was born with a caul, and so it was foretold of him that in his 14th year he should marry the king's daughter. As it happened, the king soon after came into the village, quite unknown to anyone, and when he asked the people what news there was, they answered, "A few days since a child with a caul was born, which is a sure sign that he will be very lucky. And indeed it has been foretold of him that in his 14th year he will marry the king's daughter." The king had a wicked heart, and was disturbed concerning this prophecy. So he went to the parents, and said to them in a most friendly manner, "Give me up your child, and I will take care of him." At first they refused, but the stranger begged for it with much gold, and so at last they consented, and gave him the child, thinking, "It is a luck child, and therefore everything must go well with it." The king laid the child in a box, and rode away till he came to a deep water, into which he threw the box, saying to himself, "From this unsought-for bridegroom I have now freed my daughter." The box, however, did not sink, but floated along like a boat, and not one drop of water penetrated it. It floated at last down to a mill 2 miles from the king's palace, and in the mill dam it stuck fast. The miller's boy, who was fortunately standing there, observed it, and drew it ashore with a hook, expecting to find a great treasure. When, however, he opened the box, he saw a beautiful child, alive and merry. He took it to the people at the mill, who, having no children, adopted it for their own, saying, "God has sent it to us." And they took great care of it, and it grew up full of virtues. It happened one day that the king went into the mill for shelter during a thunderstorm, and asked the people whether the boy was their child. "No," they answered. "He is a foundling who, 14 years ago, floated into our dam in a box, which the miller's boy drew out of the water." The king observed at once that it was no other than the luck child whom he had thrown into the water, and so said to them, "Good people, could not the youth carry a letter to my wife the queen? If so, I will give him 2 pieces of gold for a reward." "As my lord and king commands," they replied, and bade the youth get ready. Then the king wrote a letter to the queen, wherein he said, "So soon as this boy arrives with this letter, let him be killed and buried, and let it all be done before I return." The youth set out on his journey with the letter, but he lost himself, and at evening came into a great forest. In the gloom he saw a little light, and going up to it he found a cottage, into which he went, perceived an old woman sitting by the fire. As soon as she saw the lad, she was terrified, and exclaimed, "Why did you come here, and what would you do?" "I am come from the mill," he answered, "and am going to my lady the queen to carry a letter, but because I have lost my way in this forest, I wish to pass the night here." "Poor boy," said the woman, "you have come to a den of robbers, who, when they return, will murder you." "Let who will come," he replied. "I am not afraid. I am so weary that I can go no further." And stretching himself upon a bench, he went to sleep. Presently the robbers entered, and asked in a rage what a strange lad was lying there. "Ah," said the old woman, "it is an innocent youth who has lost himself in the forest, and whom I have taken in out of compassion. He carries with him a letter to the queen." The robbers seized the letter and read it, and understood that as soon as the youth arrived, he was to be put to death. Then the robbers took compassion on him also, and the captain tore up the letter and wrote another, wherein he declared that the youth on his arrival was to be married to the princess. They let him sleep quietly on his bench till morning, and as soon as he awoke, they gave him the letter, and showed him the right road. When the queen received the letter, she did as it commanded, and caused a splendid marriage feast to be prepared, and the princess was given in marriage to the luck child, who, since he was both young and handsome, pleased her very well, and they were all very happy. Some little time afterwards, the king returned to his palace, and found the prophecy fulfilled, and his daughter married to the luck child. "How did this happen?" he asked. "In my letter I gave quite another command." Then the queen handed him the letter, that he might read for himself what it stated. Then the king perceived that it had been forged by another person, and he asked the youth what he had done with the letter that had been entrusted to him, that he had brought another. "I know nothing about it," he replied. "It must have been changed in the forest where I passed the night." Inflamed with rage, the king answered, "Thou shalt not escape so easily. He who would have my daughter must fetch for me 3 golden hairs from the head of the giant. Bring thou to me what I desire, then shalt thou receive my daughter." The king hoped by this means to get rid of him. But he answered, "The 3 golden hairs I will fetch, for I fear not the giant." And so he took leave and began his wanderings. The road led him by a large town, where the watchman at the gate asked him what trade he understood and what he knew. "I know everything," replied the youth. "Then you can do us a kindness," said the watch. "If you will tell us the reason why the fountain in our marketplace, out of which wine used to flow, now, all at once, does not even give water." "That you shall know," was the answer, "but you must wait till I return." Then he went on further and came to a rather large city, where the watchman asked him, as before, what trade he understood and what he knew. "I know everything," he replied. "Then you can do us a kindness if you tell us the reason why a tree growing in our town, which used to bear golden apples, does not now even have any leaves." "That you shall know," replied the youth, "if you wait till I return." And so saying, he went on further, till he came to a great lake, over which it was necessary that he should pass. The ferryman asked him what trade he understood and what he knew. "I know everything," he replied. "Then," said the ferryman, "you can do me a kindness if you tell me why, for ever and ever, I am obliged to row backwards and forwards, and am never to be released." "You shall learn the reason why," replied the youth, "but wait till I return." As soon as he got over the water, he found the entrance into the giant's kingdom. It was black and gloomy, and the giant was not at home, but his old grandmother was sitting there in an immense armchair. "What do you want?" said she, looking at him fixedly. "I want 3 golden hairs from the head of the king of these regions," replied the youth. "Else I cannot obtain my bride." "That is a bold request," said the woman, "for if he comes home and finds you here, it will be a bad thing for you. But still you can remain, and I will see if I can help you." Then she changed him into an ant, and told him to creep within the fold of her gown, where he would be quite safe. "Yes," he said, "that is all very well, but there are 3 things I am desirous of knowing. Why a fountain which used to sprout wine is now dry, and does not even give water. Why a tree which used to bear golden apples does not now have leaves. And why a ferryman is always rowing backwards and forwards and never gets released." "Those are difficult questions," replied the old woman. "But do you keep quiet and pay attention to what the king says when I pluck each of the 3 golden hairs." As soon as evening came, the giant returned, and scarcely had he entered when he remarked that the air was not quite pure. I smell the flesh of man," he exclaimed. "All is not right." Then he peeped into every corner and looked about, but could find nothing. Presently his old grandmother began to scold, screaming, "There now, just as I have dusted and put everything in order, you are pulling them all about again. You are forever having man's flesh in your nose. Sit down and eat your supper." When he had finished, he felt tired, and the old woman took his head in her lap and said she would comb his hair a bit. Presently he yawned, then winked, and at last snored. Then she plucked out a golden hair and laid it down beside her. "Bah!" cried the king. "What are you about?" "I have had a bad dream," answered the old woman, "and so I plucked one of your hairs." "What did you dream then?" asked he. "I dreamt that a market fountain which used to sprout wine is dried up and does not even give water. What is the matter with it, pray?" "Why, if you must know," answered he, "there sits a toad under a stone in the spring, which, if anyone kills, wine will gush out as before." Then the old woman went on combing till he went to sleep again, and snored so that the windows shook. Presently she pulled out a second hair. "Confound it! What are you about?" exclaimed the king in a passion. "Don't be angry," said she. "I did it in a dream." "What did you dream this time?" he asked. "I dreamt that in a certain royal city there grew a fruit tree, which formerly bore golden apples, but now has not a leaf upon it. What is the cause of it?" "Why," replied the king, "at the root is a mouse gnawing, but if they kill it, golden apples will grow again. If not, the mouse will gnaw till the tree dies altogether. However, let me go to sleep in peace now, for if you disturb me again, you will catch a box on the ears." Nevertheless, the old woman, when she had rocked him again to sleep, plucked out a third golden hair. Up jumped the king in a fury and would have ill-treated her, but she pacified him and said, "Who can help bad dreams?" "What did you dream this time?" he asked, still curious to know. "I dreamt of a ferryman who is forever compelled to row backwards and forwards and will never be released. What is the reason thereof?" "Oh, you simpleton," answered the giant. "When one comes who wants to cross over, he must give the oar into his hand, then with the other be obliged to go to and fro, and he will be free." Now, since the old woman had plucked 3 golden hairs and had received the answers to 3 questions, she let the giant lie in peace, and he slept on till daybreak. As soon as he went out in the morning, the old woman took the ant out of the fold of her gown and restored him again to his human form. "There you have the 3 golden hairs from the king's head, and what he replied to the 3 questions you have just heard." "Yes, I have heard and will remember," said the luck child, and, thanking the old woman for her assistance in his trouble, he left those regions, well pleased that he had been so lucky in everything. When he came to the ferryman, he had to give him the promised answer, but he said, "First row me over, and then I will tell you how you may be freed." And as soon as they reached the opposite side, he gave him the advice, "When another comes this way and wants to pass over, give him the oar in his hand." Then he went on to the first city, where stood the barren tree, and where the watchman waited for the answer. So he said to him, "Kill the mouse which gnaws at the root of the tree, and then it will again bear golden apples." The watchman thanked him, and gave him for a reward 2 asses laden with gold, which followed him. Next he came to the other city, where the dry fountain was, and he told the watchman, as the giant had said, "Under a stone in the spring there sits a toad, which you must uncover and kill, and then wine will flow again as before." The watchman thanked him, and gave to him, as the other had done, 2 asses laden with gold. Now the lucky youth reached home, and his dear bride was very glad when she saw him return, and heard how capitally everything had gone with him. He brought the king what he had desired, the 3 golden hairs from the head of the giant. And when his majesty saw the 4 asses laden with gold, he was quite pleased, and said, "Now are the conditions fulfilled, and you may have my daughter. But tell me, dear son-in-law, whence comes all this gold? This is indeed bountiful treasure." "I was ferried over a river," he replied, "and there I picked it up, for it lies on the shore like sand." "Can I not fetch some as well?" asked the king, feeling quite covetous. "As much as you like. There is a ferryman who will row you across, and then you can fill your sacks on the other side." The covetous king set out in great haste upon his journey, and as soon as he came to the river, beckoned to the ferryman to take him over. The man came and bade him step into his boat, and as soon as they reached the opposite shore, the ferryman put the oar into his hand and sprang on shore himself. So the king was obliged to take his place, and there he is obliged to row to and fro forever for his sins. And there he still rows, for no one has yet come to take the oar from him. Thus ends The Giant with the 3 golden hairs. This next one is entitled The Handless Maiden. These stories have a lot of similar aspects to them. Again, a lot of it is corroborated in Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces, if you've ever read that book. But it says essentially that the hero must go on a journey, and they, overcome trials and tribulations in order to become a hero. And a lot of them repeat like 3 tasks that they must complete, or 3 things that they do for another person or another person does for them. And then in a lot of these too, I'm seeing multiple instances of 7 brothers being turned into crows and their sister saving them. So that's a recurring theme in the Brothers Grimm's tales, as well as evil stepmothers, which is a constant, and the marrying into royalty as a commoner, which doesn't happen. The only way that really happens is if you join the military and do some great heroic deeds in the military itself, in the service of your lord. But then again, you just become a minor lord or minor nobility. But eventually, maybe your descendants might, marry into royalty. So let us continue. The Handless Maiden by the Brothers Grimm. A certain miller had fallen by degrees into great poverty, until he had nothing left but his mill and a large apple tree. One day, when he was going into the forest to cut wood, an old man, whom he had never seen before, stepped up to him and said, Why do you trouble yourself with chopping wood? I will make you rich if you promise me what stands behind your mill." The miller thought to himself that it could be nothing but his apple tree, so he said, "Yes," and concluded the bargain with the strange man. The other, however, laughed derisively and said, "After 3 years I will come and fetch what belongs to me." And then he went away. As soon as the miller reached home, his wife came to him and said, "Tell me, husband, whence comes this sudden gold into our house? All at once every chest and cupboard is filled, and yet no man has brought any in. I cannot tell it has happened. How it has happened." The miller, in reply, told her, "It comes from a strange lord whom I met in the forest, who offered me great treasure, and I promised him in return what stands behind the mill, for we can very well spare the great apple tree." "Ah, my husband," exclaimed his wife, "it is the evil spirit whom you have seen. He did not mean the apple tree, but our daughter, who was behind the mill sweeping the yard." This miller's daughter was a beautiful and pious maiden, and during all the 3 years lived in the fear of God without sin. When the time was up and the day came when the evil one was to fetch her, she washed herself quite clean and made a circle around herself with chalk. Quite early came the evil one, but he could not approach her. So, in a rage, he said to the miller, "Take away from her all water, that she may not be able to wash herself, else I have no power over her." The miller did so, for he was afraid. The next morning came the evil one again, but she had wept upon her hands, so that they were quite clean. Then he was baffled again, and in his anger he said to the miller, "Cut off both of her hands, or else I cannot now obtain her." The miller was horrified and said, "How can I cut off the hands of my own child?" But the evil one pressed him, saying, "If you do not, you are mine, and I will take you yourself away." At last the miller promised, and he went to the maiden and said, "My child, if I do not cut off both your hands, the evil one will carry me away, and in my terror I have promised him. Now help me in my trouble, and forgive me for the wickedness I am about to do." She replied, "Dear father, do with me what you will. I am your daughter." Thereupon she laid down both her hands, and her father cut them off. For the 3rd time now the evil one came, but the maiden had let fall so many tears upon her arms that they were both quite clean. So he was obliged to give her up, and after this lost all power over her. The miller now said to her, "I have received so much good through you, my daughter, that I will care for you most dearly all your life long." But she answered, "Here I cannot remain. I will wander forth into the world, where compassionate men will give me as much as I require." Then she had her arms bound behind her back, and sunrise departed on her journey, and walked the whole day long till night fell. At that time she arrived at a royal garden, and by the light of the moon she saw a tree standing there, bearing the most beautiful fruits. But she could not enter, for there was water all round. Since, however, she had walked the whole day without tasting a morsel, she was tormented by hunger, and said to herself, "Ah, would I were there, that I might eat of the fruit, else I shall perish with hunger." 40pie, thank you for the follow. Thank you for following. So she kneeled and prayed to God, and all at once an angel came down, who made a passage through the water, so that the ground was dry for her to pass over. Then she went into the garden, and the angel with her. There she saw a tree full of beautiful pears, but they were all numbered. So she stepped up and ate one to appease her hunger, but no more. The gardener perceived her do it, but because the angel stood by, he was afraid, and thought the maiden was a spirit, so he remained quiet and did not address her. As soon as she had eaten the pear, she was satisfied, and went and hid herself under the bushes. The next morning the king, to whom the garden belonged, came down, and counting the pears, found that one was missing. And he asked the gardener whither it was gone. The gardener replied, "Last night a spirit came, who had no hands, and ate the pear with her mouth." The king then asked, "How did the spirit come through the water, and whither did it go after it had eaten the pear?" "An angel clothed in snow-white garments came down from heaven and made a passage through the waters, so that the spirit walked through the ditch. And because it was an angel, I was afraid, and neither called out nor questioned it. And as soon as it had finished the fruit, it returned as it came." The king said, "If it be as you say, I will this night watch with you." As soon as it was dark, the king came into the garden, bringing with him a priest, who was to address the spirit, and all three sat down under the tree. About midnight, the maiden crept out from under the bushes, and again ate with her mouth a pear off of the tree, whilst the angel, clothed in white, stood by her. Then the priest went towards her, and said, "Art thou come from God, or from earth? Art thou a spirit, or a human being?" She replied, "I am no spirit, but a poor maiden, deserted by all, save God alone." The king said, "If you are forsaken by all the world, yet will I not forsake you." And he took her with him to his royal palace, and because she was so beautiful and pious, he loved her with all his heart, and ordered silver hands to be made for her, and made her his bride. After a year had passed by, the king was obliged to go to war, so he commenced the young queen to care of his mother, and told her to write him word if she had a child born, and to pay her especial attention. Soon afterwards the queen bore a fine boy, so the old mother wrote a letter to her son containing the joyful news. The messenger, however, rested on his way by a brook, and, being weary of his long journey, fell asleep. Then came the evil one, who had always been trying to do some evil to the queen, and changed the letter for another, wherein it was said that the queen had brought a changeling into the world. As soon as the king had read this letter, he was frightened and much troubled. Nevertheless, he wrote an answer to his mother, that she should take great care of the queen until his arrival. The messenger went back with this letter, but on his way rested at the same spot, and went to sleep. Then the evil one came a second time, and put another letter in his pocket, wherein it was said the queen and her child should be killed. When the old mother received this letter, she was struck with horror, and could not believe it. So she wrote another letter to the king, but she received no other answer, for the evil one again placed a false letter in the messenger's pocket, and in this last it said that she should preserve the tongue and eyes of the queen, for a sign that she had fulfilled his commands. The old mother was sorely grieved to shed innocent blood, so she caused a calf to be fetched by night, and cut off its tongue, and took out its eyes. Then she said to the queen, "I cannot let you be killed, as the king commands, but you must remain here no longer. Go forth with your child into the wide world, and never return here again." Thus saying, she bound the child upon the young queen's back, and the poor wife went away, weeping bitterly. Soon she entered a large wild forest, and there she fell upon her knees and prayed to God. And the angel appeared and led her to a little cottage, and over the door was a shield inscribed with the words, "Here may every one live freely." Out of the house came a snow-white maiden, who said, "Welcome, Lady Queen," and led her in. Then she took the little child from the queen's back and gave it some nourishment, and laid it on a beautifully covered bed. Presently the queen asked, "How do you know that I am a queen?" And the maiden answered, "I am an angel sent from God to tend to you and your child. And in this cottage she lived for 7 years, and was well cared for. And through God's mercy on her, on account of her piety, her hands grew again as before." Meanwhile the king had come home, and his first thought was to see his wife and child. Then his mother began to weep, and said, "You wicked husband, why did you write to me that I should put to death 2 innocent souls?" And, showing him the 2 letters which the evil one had forged, she continued, "I have done as you commanded." And she brought him the tokens, the 2 eyes and the tongue. Then the king began to weep so bitterly for his dear wife and son that the old mother pitied him, and said, "Be comforted, she lives yet. I caused a calf to be slain, from whom I took these tokens. Put the child I bound on your wife's back, and bade them go forth into the wild world, and she promised never to return here, because you were so wrathful against her." "So far as heaven is blue," exclaimed the king, "I will go, and neither will I eat nor drink until I have found again my dear wife and child, if they have not perished of hunger by this time." Thereupon the king set out, and for 7 long years sought his wife in every stony cleft and rocky cave, but found her not. And he began to think she must have perished. And all this time he neither ate nor drank, but God sustained him. At last he came into a large forest, and found there a little cottage, whereupon the shield was with the words, "Here may every one live freely." Out of the house came the white maiden, and she took him by the hand, and leading him in, said, "Be welcome, great king. Whence comest thou?" He replied, "For 7 long years have I sought everywhere for my wife and child, but I have not succeeded." Then the angel offered him meat and drink, but he refused both, and would only rest a little while. So he laid down to sleep, and covered his face with a napkin. Now went the angel into the chamber where sat the queen with her son, whom she usually called Sorrowful, and said to her, "Come down with your child. Your husband is here." So she went to where he lay, and the napkin fell from his face. So the queen said, "Sorrowful, pick up the napkin and cover again your father's face." The child did as he was bid, and the king, who heard in his slumber what passed, let the napkin again fall from off his face. At this the boy became impatient and said, "Dear mother, how can I cover my father's face? Have I indeed a father on the earth? I have learnt the prayer, 'Our Father which art in heaven,' and you have told me my father was in heaven. The good God, how can I talk to this wild man? He is not my father." As the king heard this, he raised himself up and asked the queen who she was. The queen replied, "I am your wife, and this is your son, Sorrowful." But when he saw her human hands, he said, "My wife has silver hands." "The merciful God," said the queen, "has caused my hands to grow again." And the angel, going into her chamber, brought out the silver hands and showed them to him. Now he perceived that they were very clearly his dear wife and child, and he kissed them gladly, saying, "A heavy stone is taken from my heart." And after eating a meal together with the angel, they went home to the king's mother. Their arrival caused great rejoicings everywhere, and the king and queen celebrated their marriage again, and ever afterwards lived happily together to the end of their lives. Thus ends The Handless Maiden. This next one is entitled Clever Alice. Just accidentally closed the book. So now I gotta find my spot again. There we are. Found it. Outer chat. Crisis averted. So let us continue. Clever Alice by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time there was a man who had a daughter who was called Clever Alice. And when she was grown up, her father said, "We must see about her marrying." "Yes," replied the mother, "when one comes who may be worthy of her." At last a certain youth, by name Hans, came from a distance to make a proposal for her, but he put in one condition, that the Clever Alice should also be very prudent. "Oh," said her father, "she has got a head full of brains." And the mother added, "Ah, she can see the wind blow up the street and hear the flies cough." "Very well," replied Hans, "but if she is not very prudent, I will not have her." Soon afterwards they sat down to dinner, and her mother said, "Alice, go down to the cellar and draw some beer." So Clever Alice took the jug down from the wall and went into the cellar, jerking the lid up and down on her way to pass away the time. As soon as she got downstairs, she drew a stool and placed it before the cask, in order that she might not have to stoop, whereby she might do some injury to her back, and give it an undesirable bend. Then she placed the can before her and turned the tap, and while the beer was running, as she did not wish her eyes to be idle, she looked about upon a wall above and below, and presently perceived, after much peeping into this and that corner, a hatchet, which the bricklayers had left behind sticking out of the ceiling right above her. At the sight of this, the clever Alice began to cry, saying, "Oh, if I marry Hans, and we have a child, and he grows up, and we send him into the cellar to draw beer, the hatchet will fall upon his head and kill him." And so saying, she sat there weeping with all her might over the impending misfortune. Meanwhile, the good folks upstairs were waiting for the beer, but as clever Alice did not come, her mother told the maid to go and see what she was stopping for. The maid went down to the cellar and found Alice sitting before the cask, crying heartily, and she asked, "Alice, what are you weeping about?" "Ah," she replied, "have I not cause? If I marry Hans, and we have a child, and he grows up, and we send him here to draw beer, that hatchet will fall upon his head and kill him." "Oh," said the maid, "what a clever Alice we have." And sitting down, she began to weep too, for the misfortune that was to happen. After a while, and the maid did not return, the good folks above began to feel very thirsty, and so the husband told the boy to go down to the cellar and see what had become of Alice and the maid. The boy went down, and there sat clever Alice and the maid, both crying. So he asked the reason, and Alice told him the same tale of the hatchet that was to fall on her child, as she had told the maid. When she had finished, the boy exclaimed, "What a clever Alice we have!" and fell weeping and howling with the others. Upstairs they were still waiting, and the husband said, when the boy did not return, "Do you go down, wife, into the cellar and see why Alice stops." So she went down, and finding all three sitting there crying, asked the reason, and Alice told her about the hatchet which must inevitably fall upon the head of her son. Then the mother likewise exclaimed, "Oh, what a clever Alice we have!" and, sitting down, began to weep with the others. Meanwhile the husband waited for his wife's return, but at last he felt so very thirsty that he said, "I must go myself down to the cellar and see what Alice stops for." As soon as he entered the cellar, there he found the four sitting and crying together, and when he heard the reason, he also exclaimed, "Oh, what a clever Alice we have!" and sat down to cry with the others. All this time the bridegroom above sat waiting, but when nobody returned, he thought they must be waiting for him, and so he went down to see what was the matter. When he entered, there sat the five crying and groaning, each one in a louder key than his neighbor. "What misfortune has happened?" he asked. "Ah, dear Hans," cried Alice, "if we should marry one another and have a child, and he grow up, and we perhaps send him down here to tap the beer, the hatchet which has been left sticking there may fall on his head and so kill him. And do you not think that enough to weep about?" "Now," said Hans, "more prudence than this is not necessary for my housekeeping. Because you are such a clever Alice, I will have you for my wife." And, taking her hand, he led her home and celebrated the wedding directly. After they had been married a little while, Hans said one morning, "Wife, I will go out to work and earn some money. Do you go to the field and gather some corn wherewith to make bread." Yes, she answered, I will do so, dear Hans. And when he was gone, she cooked herself a nice mess of pottage to take with her. As she came to the field, she said to herself, What shall I do? Shall I cut first or eat first? I will eat first. Then she ate up all the contents of her pot, and when it was finished, she thought to herself, Now shall I reap first or sleep first? Well, I think I will have a nap. And so she laid herself down amongst the corn and went to sleep. Meanwhile Hans returned home, but Alice did not come, and so he said, Oh, what a prudent Alice I have! She is so industrious that she does not even come home to eat anything. By and by, however, evening came on, and still she did not return. So Hans went out to see how much she had reaped, but behold, nothing at all. And there lay Alice fast asleep among the corn. So home he ran very fast, and brought a net with little bells hanging on it, which he threw over her head while she still slept on. When he had done this, he went back again and shut to the house door, and seating himself on his stool, began working very industriously. At last, when it was quite dark, the clever Alice awoke, and as soon as she stood up, the net fell all over her hair, and the bells jingled at every step she took. This quite frightened her, and she began to doubt whether she were really clever Alice or no, and said to herself, Am I she, or am I not? This question she could not answer, and she stood a long while considering. At last she thought she would go home and ask whether she was really herself, supposing they would be able to tell. When she came to the house door, it was shut, so she tapped at the window and asked, Hans, is Alice within? Yes, he replied, she is. Now she was really terrified, and exclaiming, Ah, heaven, then I am not Alice. She ran up to another house, but as soon as the folks within heard the jingling of the bells, they would not open their doors, and so nobody would receive her. Then she ran straight away from the village, and no one has ever seen her since. Thus ends Clever Alice. This next tale is entitled The Table, the Ass, and the Stick. There we go. I'm going to change that. There we are. That looks nicer. The Table, the Ass, and the Stick by the brothers Grimm. A long while ago, there lived a tailor who had 3 sons, but only a single goat, which, as it had to furnish milk for all, was obliged to have a good fodder every day, and to be led into the meadow for it. This the sons had to do by turns, and one morning the eldest took the goat into the churchyard, where grew the finest herbs, which he let it eat. And then it frisked about undisturbed till evening, when it was time to return, and then he asked, Goat, are you satisfied? The goat replied, I am satisfied quiet. No more can I bite. Then come home, said the youth, and catching hold of the rope, he led it to the stall and made it fast. "Now," said the old tailor, "has the goat had its proper food?" "Yes," replied his son, "it has eaten all it can." The father, however, would see for himself, and so, going into the stall, he stroked the goat and asked it whether it was satisfied. The goat replied, "Whereof should I be satisfied? I only jumped about the graves and found not a single leaf." "What do I hear?" exclaimed the tailor, and ran up to his son and said, "Oh, you bad boy! You said the goat was satisfied, and then brought it away hungry." And, taking the yard measure down from the wall, he hunted his son out of the house in a rage. The following morning was the second son's turn, and he picked out a place in the garden hedge where some very fine herbs grew, which the goat ate up entirely. When, in the evening, he wanted to return, he asked the goat first whether it was satisfied, and it replied as before, "I am satisfied quite, no more can I bite." "Then come home," said the youth, and drove it to its stall, and tied it fast. Soon after, the old tailor asked, "Has the goat had its usual food?" "Oh, yes," answered the son. "It ate up all the leaves." But the tailor would see for himself, and so he went into the stall and asked the goat whether it had had enough. "Whereof should I be satisfied? I only jumped about the hedge and found not a single leaf," replied the animal. "The wicked scamp!" exclaimed the tailor, "to let such a capital of animal starve." And, running indoors, he drove his son out of the house with his yard measure. It was now the third son's turn, and he, willing to make a good beginning, sought some bushes full of beautifully tender leaves, of which he let the goat plentifully partake. And at evening time, when he wished to go home, he asked the goat the same question as the others had done, and received the same answer. "I am satisfied quite, no more can I bite." So he led it home, and tied it up in its stall, and presently the old man came and asked whether the goat had had its regular food, and the youth replied, "Yes," but he would go and see for himself, and then the wicked beast told him as it had done before, "Whereof should I be satisfied? I only jumped about the bush, and found not a single leaf." "Oh, the scoundrel!" exclaimed the tailor in a rage. "He is just as careless and forgetful as the others. He shall no longer eat of my bread." And, rushing into the house, he dealt his youngest son such a tremendous blows with the yard measure that the boy ran quite away. The old tailor was now left alone with his goat, and the following morning he went to the stall and fondled the animal, saying, "Come, my dear little creature, I will lead you myself into the meadow." And, taking the rope, he brought it to some green lettuces and let it feed to its heart content. When evening arrived, he asked it, as his sons had done before, whether it was satisfied, and it replied, "I am satisfied quite, no more can I bite." So he led it home and tied it up in its stall, but before he left it, he turned round and asked once more, "Are you quite satisfied?" The malicious brute answered in the same manner as before, "Whereof should I be satisfied? I only jumped about the green, and found not a single leaf." As soon as the tailor heard this, he was thunderstruck, and perceived directly that he had driven away his 3 sons without cause. "Stop a bit, you ungrateful beast!" he exclaimed. "To drive you away will be too little. I will mark you so that you shall no more dare to show yourself among honorable tailors." So saying, he sprang up with great speed, and, fetching a razor, shaved the goat's head as bare as the palm of his hand. And, because the yard measure was too honorable for such service, he laid hold of a whip and gave the animal such hearty cuts with it that it ran off as fast as possible. When the old man sat down again in his house, he fell into great grief, and would have been only too happy to have had his 3 sons back, but no one knew whether they had wandered. The eldest, however, had gone apprentice to a joiner, with whom he worked industriously and cheerfully, and when his time was out, his master presented him with a table, which had certainly a very ordinary appearance, and was made of common wood, but it had one excellent quality. If its owner placed it before him and said, "Table, cover thyself," the good table was at once covered with a fine cloth, and plates, and knives, and forks, and dishes of roast and baked meat took their places on it, and a great glass filled with red wine, which gladdened one's heart. Our young fellow thought, "Herewith you have enough for your lifetime," and went, full of glee, about the world, never troubling himself whether the inn were good or bad, or whether it contained anything or nothing. Whether he pleased, he went to no inn at all, but in the field or wood, or any meadow, in fact, just where he liked, to take the table off his back and set it before him, saying, "Table, cover thyself," if he had all he could desire to drink and eat. At last it came into his head that he would return to his father, whose anger, he thought, would be abated by time, and with whom he might live very comfortably with his excellent table. It fell out that, on his journey home, he one evening arrived at an inn which was full of people, who bade him welcome, and invited him to come in and eat with them, or he would get nothing at all. But our joiner replied, "No, I will not take a couple of bites with you. You must rather be my guests." At this the others laughed, and thought he was making game of them. But he placed the wooden table in the middle of the room, and said, "Table, cover thyself." And in the twinkling of an eye, it was set out with meats as good as any that the host could have furnished, and the smell of which mounted very savory in the noses of the guests. "Be welcome, good friends," said the joiner, and the guests, when they saw he was in earnest, waited not to be asked twice, but quickly seating themselves, set to valiantly with their knives. What made them most wonder, however, was that when any dish became empty, another full one instantly took its place, and the landlord, who stood in a corner looking on, thought to himself, "You could make good use of such a cook as that in your trade." But he said nothing. Meanwhile, the joiner and his companions sat making merry till late at night. But at last they went to bed, and the joiner too, who placed his wishing table against the wall before going to sleep. The landlord, however, could not get to sleep, for his thoughts troubled him, and suddenly remembering that there stood in his lumber room an old table which was useless, he went and fetched it, and put it in the place of the wishing table. The next morning the joiner counted out his lodging money, and placed the table on his back, ignorant that it had been changed, and went his way. At noonday he reached his father's house, and was received with great joy. "Now, my dear son," said the old man, "what have you learned?" "I have become a joiner, father." "A capital trade, too. But what have you brought home with you from your travels?" "The best thing I have brought," said the youth, "is this table." The father looked at it on every side and said, "You have made a very bad hand of that. It is an old and worthless table." "But," interrupted his son, "it is one which covers itself, and which I place it before me and say, 'Table, cover thyself.' It is instantly filled with the most savory meats and wine, which will make your heart sing. Just invite your friends and acquaintances, and you shall soon see how they will be refreshed and revived." As soon, then, as the company has arrived, he placed his table in the middle of the room, and called out to it to cover itself. But the table did not stir, and remained as empty as any other table, which does not understand what is spoken. And the poor joiner at once perceived that the table was changed, and he was ashamed to appear thus like an impostor before the guests, who laughed at him, and were obliged to go home without eating or drinking. So the father took up his mending again, and stitched away as fast as ever, and the son was obliged to go and work for a master carpenter. Meanwhile the second son had been living with a miller, and learning his trade, and soon as his time was up, his master said to him, "Because you have served me so well, I present you with this ass, which has a wonderful gift, although it neither can draw a wagon nor carry a sack." "For what, then, is it useful?" asked the youth. "It speaks gold," replied the miller. "If you tie a pocket under his chin and cry, 'Bricklebrit,' then the good beast will pour out a gold coin like hail." "That is a very fine thing," thought the youth, and, thanking the master, he went off upon his journey. Now, whenever he needed money, he had only to say to his ass, "Bricklebrit," and it rained down gold pieces, so that he had no other trouble than to pick them up again from the ground. Wherever he went, the best only was good enough for him, and the dearer it was for the better, for he had always a full purse. When he had looked about him for some time in the world, he thought he would go and visit his father, whose anger, he supposed, has abated. And moreover, since he brought with him an ass of gold, he would no doubt receive him gladly. It so happened that he came to the very same inn where his brother's table had been changed, and as he came up, leading his ass by the hand, the landlord would have taken it and tied it up. But our young master said to him, "You need not trouble yourself. I will lead my grey beast myself into the stable and tie him, for I must know where he stands." The landlord wondered at this, and he thought that one who looked after his own beast would not spend much. But presently our friend, dipping into his pocket and taking out 2 pieces of gold, gave them to him, and bade him fetch the best he could. This made the landlord open his eyes, and he ran and fetched, in a great hurry, the best he could get. When he had finished his meal, the youth asked what further he was indebted, and the landlord, having no mind to spare him, said that a couple of gold pieces more was due. The youth felt in his pocket, but his money was just at an end, so he exclaimed, "Wait a bit, my landlord. I will go and fetch some gold." And, taking the tablecloth with him, he went out. The landlord knew not what to think, but being covetous, he slinked out after the youth, and, as he bolted the stable door, the landlord peeped through a hole in the wall. The youth spread the cloth beneath the ass and called out, "Bricklebit!" And in a moment the beast began to speak out gold, as if rain were falling. "By the powers!" exclaimed the landlord. "Ducats are soon coined so. That is not a bad sort of purse." The youth now paid his bill and laid down to sleep, but in the middle of the night the landlord slipped into the stable and led away the mint master, and tied up a different ass in its place. In the morning early, the youth drove away with his ass, thinking it was his own, and at noonday he arrived at his father's, who was very glad to see him return, and received him kindly. "What trade have you become?" asked the father. "A miller," was the reply. "And what have you brought home with you from your wanderings?" "Nothing but an ass." "Oh, there are plenty of that sort here now. It had far better been a goat," said the old man. "Yes," replied the son, "but this is no common animal, but one which, when I say Bricklebit, speaks gold right and left. Just call your friends here, and I will make them all rich in a twinkling." "Well," exclaimed the tailor, "that would please me very well, and so I need not use my needle any more." And running out, he called together all his acquaintances. As soon as they were assembled, the young miller bade them make a circle, and, spreading out a cloth, he brought the ass into the middle of the room. "Now pay attention," said he to them, and called out, "Bricklebit!" But not a single gold piece fell, and it soon appeared that the ass did not understand, for it is not everyone that can be so taught. The poor young man began to make a long face when he saw that he had been deceived, and he was obliged to beg pardon of the guests, who were forced to return as poor as they came. So it happened that the old man had to take to his needle again, and the youth to bind himself with another master. Meanwhile, the third brother had gone to a turner to learn his trade, but he got on very slowly, as it was very difficult art to acquire, and while he was there, his brothers sent him word how badly things had gone with them, and how the landlord had robbed them of their wishing gifts on their return home. When the time came round that he had learnt everything and wished to leave, his master presented him with a sack, saying, "In there lies a stick." "I will take the stack readily, for it may do me good service," replied the youth. "But what is the stick for? It only makes the sack heavier to carry." "That I will tell you. If anyone does you an injury, you have only to say, 'Stick, out of the sack!' and instantly the stick will spring out and dance about on the people's backs in such a style that they will not be able to stir a finger for a week afterwards. And, moreover, it will not leave off till you say, 'Stick, get back into the sack.'" The youth thanked him and hung the sack over his shoulders, and when anyone came too near and wished to meddle with him, he said, "Stick, come out of the sack!" And immediately it sprang out and began laying about it. And when he called it back, it disappeared so quickly that no one could tell where it came from. One evening he arrived at the inn where his brothers had been basely robbed, and, lying his knapsack on the table, he began to talk of all the wonderful things he had seen in the world. "Yes," said he, "one may find, indeed, a table which supplies itself, and a golden ass, and such like things. All very good in their place, and I do not despise them, but they shrink into nothing beside the treasure which I carry with me in this sack." The landlord pricked up his ears, saying, "What on earth could it be?" But he thought to himself, "The sack is certainly full of precious stones, and I must manage to get a hold of them, for all good things come in threes." As soon as it was bedtime, our youth stretched himself upon a bench and laid his sack down for a pillow, and, when he appeared to be in a deep sleep, the landlord crept softly to him and began to pull very gently and cautiously at the sack to see if he could manage to draw it away and put another in its place. The young turner, however, had been waiting for him to do this, and, just as the man gave a good pull, he exclaimed, "Stick, out of the sack with you!" Immediately, out it jumped, and thumped about on the landlord's back and ribs with a good will. The landlord began to cry for mercy, but the louder he cried, the more forcibly did the stick beat time on his back, until at last he fell exhausted to the ground. Then the turner said, "If you do not give up the table which feeds itself, and the golden ass, that dance shall commence again." "No, no," cried the landlord in a weak voice. "I will give them up with pleasure, but just let your horrible hobgoblin get back into its sack." "I will give you pardon if you do right, but take care what you are about," replied the turner, and he let him rest and bade the stick return. On the following morning the turner, accordingly, went away with the table and the ass on his road home to his father, who, as soon as he saw him, felt very glad, and asked what he had learned in foreign parts. "Dear father," replied he, "I have become a turner." "A difficult business, that. But what have you brought back with you from your travels?" "A precious stick," replied the son. "A stick in this sack." "What?" exclaimed the old man. "A stick? Well, that is worth the trouble. Why, you can cut one from every tree." "But not such a stick as this, for if I say, 'Stick, out of the sack,' it instantly jumps out, and executes such a dance upon the back of anyone who would injure me, that at last he is beaten to the ground, crying for mercy. Do you see, with this stick I have got back again the wonderful table and the golden ass, of which the thievish landlord robbed my brothers? Now let them both be summoned home, and invite all your acquaintances, and I will not only give them plenty to eat and drink, but pocketfuls of money." The old tailor would scarcely believe him, but, nevertheless, he called in his friends. Then the young turner placed a tablecloth in the middle of the room, and led on the ass, saying to his brother, "Now speak to him." The miller called out, "Bricklebrit!" and in a moment the gold pieces dropped down on the floor in a pelting shower, and so it continued, until they all had so much they could carry no more. I fancy my readers would have been very happy to have been there too. After this, the table was fetched in, and the joiner said, "Table, cover thyself." And it was once filled with the choicest dishes. Then they began such a meal as the tailor had never had before in his house, and the whole company remained till late at night, merry and jovial. The next day the tailor forsook needle and thread, and put them all away, with his measures and goose, in a cupboard, and forever after lived happily and contentedly with his 3 sons. But now I must tell you what became of the goat, whose fault it was that the 3 brothers were driven away. It was so ashamed of its bald head that it ran into a fox's hole and hid itself. When the fox came home, he saw a pair of great eyes looking at him in the darkness, which so frightened him that he ran back, and presently met a bear, who, perceiving how terrified Reynard appeared, said to him, "What is the matter, brother fox, that you make such a face?"
"Ah," he exclaimed, "in my hole sits a horrible beast who glared at me with most fiery eyes."
"Oh, we will soon drive him out," said the bear, and, going up to the hole, he peeped in himself. But as soon as he saw the fiery eyes, he also turned tail, and would have nothing to do with the terrible beast, and took to flight. On his way, a bee met him, and soon saw he could not feel much through his thick coat, and so she said, "You are making a very rueful face, Mr. Bear. Pray, where have you left your merry one?"
"Why," answered Bruin, "a great horrible beast has laid himself down in Reynard's house, and glares there with such fearful eyes, we cannot drive him out."
"Well, Mr. Bear," said the bee, "I am sorry for you. I am a poor creature whom you never notice, but yet I believe I can help you."
So saying, she flew into the fox's hole, and, settling on the clean-shaven head of the goat, stung it so dreadfully that the poor animal sprang up and ran madly off, and nobody knows to this hour where it ran to. Thus ends The Table, the Ass, and the Stick. This next story is entitled Thumbling. And, funny, you would have thought that there would be some like now distinguishing feature of the goat that never existed before this. Like, oh, that's why goats have, these eyes or something. Instead of regular animal eyes or something like that. That now it's their features. But I guess that's more like mythology type thinking. All right, so let us continue. Thumbling by the brothers Grimm. Once upon a time there lived a poor peasant who used to sit every evening by the hearth, poking the fire, while his wife spun. One night he said, "How sad it is that we have no children. Everything is so quiet here, while in other houses it is so noisy and merry." "Ah," sighed his wife, "if we had but only one, and were he no bigger than my thumb, I should still be content and love him with all my heart." A little while after, the wife fell ill, and after 7 months a child was born, who, although he was perfectly formed in all his limbs, was not actually bigger than one's thumb. So they said to one another, that it had happened just as they wished, and they called the child Thumbling. Every day they gave him all the food he could eat. Still he did not grow a bit, but remained exactly the height he was when first born. He looked about him, however, very knowingly, and showed himself to be a bold and clever fellow, who prospered in everything he undertook. One moment, chat. No, thank you for tea pie. No self-promotion in my chat. Yeah. To continue. One morning, a peasant was making ready to go into the forest to fell wood, and said, "Now I wish I had some one who could follow me with the cart." "Oh, father," exclaimed Thumbling, "I will bring the cart. Don't you trouble yourself. It shall be there at the right time." The father laughed at this speech, and said, "How shall that be? You are much too small to lead the horse by the bridle." "That matters not, father. If mother will harness the horse, I can sit in his ear and tell him which way to take." "We will try. Well, we will try for once," said the father. And so, when the hour came, the mother harnessed the horse and placed Thumbling in his ear, and told him how to guide it. Then he set out quite like a man, and the cart went out on the right road to the forest, and just as it turned a corner, and Thumbling called out, "Steady, steady!" 2 strange men met it, and one said to the other, "My goodness, what is this? Here comes a cart, and the driver keeps calling to the horse, but I can see no one. That cannot be all right." Said the other, "Let us follow and see where the cart stops." Sayako Live, thank you for the follow. Thank you for following. The cart went on safely deep into the forest, and straight to the place where the wood was cut. As soon as Thumbling saw his father, he called to him, "Here, father, here I am, you see, with the cart. Just take me down." The peasant caught the bridle of the horse with his left hand, and with his right took his little son out of its ear, and he sat himself down merrily on a straw. When the 2 strangers saw the little fellow, they knew not what to say for astonishment, and one of them took his companion aside and said, "This little fellow might make our fortune if we could exhibit him in the towns. Let us buy him." They went up to the peasant and asked, "Will you sell your son? We will treat him well." "No," said the man, "he is my heart's delight, and not to be bought for all the money in the world." But Thumbling, when he heard what was said, climbed up by his father's shirt, and set himself on his shoulder, and whispered in his ear, "Let me go now, and I will soon come back again." So his father gave him to the 2 men for a fine piece of gold. And they asked him where he would sit. Sorry, I forgot to turn the chat back on because I was trying to get rid of that thing. Hi, Sayako. They asked him where he would sit. "Oh," replied he, "put me on the rim of your hat, and then I can walk around and survey the country. I will not fall off." They did as he wished, and when he had taken leave of his father, they set out. Just as it was getting dark, he asked to be lifted down, and, after some demur, the man on whose hat he was took him off and placed him on the ground. In an instant, Thumbling ran off and crept into a mouse hole where they could not see him. "Good evening, masters," said he. "You can go home without me." And with a quiet laugh, he crept into his hole still further. The two men poked their sticks into the hole, but all in vain, for Thumbling only went down further, and when it had grown quite dark, they were obliged to return home full of vexation and with empty pockets. Yes, an exhibition show. As soon as Thumbling perceived that they were off, he crawled out of his hiding place and said, "How dangerous it is to walk in this field in the dark! One might soon break one's head or legs." And so saying, he looked round, and by great good luck saw an empty snail shell. "God be praised!" he exclaimed. "Here I can sleep securely." And in he went. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he heard two men coming by, one of whom said to the other, "How shall we manage to get the parson's gold and silver?" "That I can tell you," interrupted Thumbling. "What was that?" exclaimed the thief, frightened. "I heard someone speak." They stood still and listened, and then Thumbling said, "Take me with you, and I will help you." Thanks, Sayako. "Where are you?" asked the thieves. "Search on the ground and mark where my voice comes from," replied he. The thief looked about, and at last found him and lifted him up in the air. "What, will you help us, you little wight?" said they. "Do you see I can creep between the iron bars into the chamber of the parson and reach out to you whatever you require?" "Very well, we will see what you can do," said the thief. When they came to the house, Thumbling crept into the chamber and cried out with all his might, "Will you have all that is here?" The thieves were terrified and said, "Speak gently, or someone will awake." But Thumbling feigned not to understand, and exclaimed louder still, "Will you have all that is here?" This awoke the cook, who slept in the room, and sitting up in her bed she listened. The thieves, however, had run back a little way, quite frightened. But, taking courage again, and thinking the little fellow wished to tease him, they came and whispered to him to make haste and handed them out something. At this, Thumbling cried out still more loudly, "I will give you it all, only put your hands in." The listening maid heard this clearly, and, springing out of bed, hurried out at the door. The thieves ran off, as they were pursued by the wild huntsman. When she returned, Thumbling escaped without being seen into the barn, and the maid, after she had looked round and searched in every corner without finding anything, went to bed again, believing she had been dreaming with her eyes open. Meanwhile, Thumbling had crept in amongst the hay and found a beautiful place to sleep, where he intended to rest until daybreak, and then to go home to his parents. Other things, however, was he to experience. for there is much tribulation and trouble on in this world. The maid got up at dawn of day to feed the cow. Her first walk was to the barn, where she took an armful of hay, and just the bundle where poor Thumbling lay asleep. He slept so soundly, however, that he was not conscious, and only awoke when he was in the cow's mouth.
"Ah, goodness!" exclaimed he. "However came I into this mill?"
But soon he saw where he really was. Then he took care not to come between the teeth, but presently slipped quite down the cow's throat.
"There are no windows in this room," said he to himself, "and no sunshine, and I brought no light with me."
Sorry, Sayako, I don't have a Discord. I need to eventually start one, though. Yeah, I just have a Twitch, Kick, and YouTube. Overhead, his quarters seemed still worse, and, more than all, he felt his room growing narrower as the cows swallowed more hay. So he began to call out in terror as loudly as he could.
"Bring me no more food! I do not want any more food!"
Just then the maid was milking the cow, and when she heard the voice without seeing anything, and knew it was the same she had listened to in the night, she was so frightened that she slipped off her stool and overturned the milk. In great haste she ran to her master, saying,
"Oh, Mr. Parson, the cow has been speaking."
"You are crazy," he replied. But still he went himself to the stable to see what was the matter. And scarcely had he stepped in when Thumbling began to shout out again,
"Bring me no more food! Bring me no more food!"
This terrified the parson himself, and he thought an evil spirit had entered into his cow, and so he ordered her to be killed. As soon as that was done, and they were dividing the carcass, a fresh accident befell Thumbling, for a wolf, who was passing at the time, made a snatch at the cow and tore away the part where he was stuck fast. However, he did not lose courage, but as soon as the wolf had swallowed him, he called out from inside,
"Oh, Mr. Wolf, I know of a capital meal for you."
"Where is it to be found?" asked the wolf.
"In the house by the meadow. You must creep through the gutter, and there you will find cakes and bacon and sausages, as many as you can eat," replied Thumbling, describing exactly his father's house. The wolf did not wait to be told twice, but in the night crept in and ate away in the larder to his heart's content. When he had finished, he tried to escape by the way he entered, but the hole was not large enough. Thereupon Thumbling, who had reckoned on this, began to make a tremendous noise inside the poor wolf, screaming and shouting as loud as he could. "Will you be quiet?" said the wolf. "You will wake the people." What?" cried the little man. "Since you have satisfied yourself, it is my turn now to make merry." And he set up a louder howling than before. At last his father and mother awoke, and came to the room, and looked through the chinks of the door, and as soon as they perceived the ravages the wolf had committed, they ran and brought the man his axe, and the woman the scythe. "Stop you behind," said the man as they entered the room. "If my blow does not kill him, you must give him a cut with your weapon, and chop off his head if you can." When Thumbling heard his father's voice, he called out, "Father, dear, I am here, in the wolf's body." "Heaven be praised," said the man, full of joy. "Our dear child is found again." And he bade his wife take away the scythe, lest it should do any harm to his son. Then he raised his axe and gave the wolf such a blow on his head that it fell dead, and, taking a knife, he cut it open and released the little fellow, his son. "Ah," said his father, "what trouble we have had about you." "Yes, father," replied Thumbling. "I have been traveling a great deal about the world. Heaven be praised, I breathe fresh air again."
"Where have you been, my son?" he inquired.
"Once I was in a mouse's hole, once inside a cow, and lastly inside that wolf. And now I will stop here with you," said Thumbling.
"Yes," said the old people, "we will not sell you again for all the riches of the world."
And they embraced and kissed him with great affection. Then they gave him plenty to eat and drink, and had new clothes made for him, for his old ones were worn out with traveling. Thus ends Thumbling. Can you imagine trying to find clothes for him? It should be fairly easy. There's small doll shops, I'm assuming. This next tale is entitled The Wedding of Mrs. Fox. Is that Miss Morris? All right. There we are. Yeah, I do need to eventually get around to starting up a Discord. But thank you for the compliment on my voice, Sayako. I appreciate it. Every Friday, I'll read Fair Use Works. The Wedding of Mrs. Fox. First tale. There was once upon a time a fox with 9 tails, who thought his wife was not faithful to him, and determined to put it to the proof. So he stretched himself along under a bench, and, keeping his legs perfectly still, he appeared as if quite dead. Mrs. Fox, meanwhile, had ascended to her room and shut herself in, and her maid, the young cat, stood near the hearth cooking. As soon as it was known that Mr. Fox was dead, several suitors came to pay their respects to his widow. The maid, hearing someone knocking at the front door, went and looked out, and saw a young fox, who asked, "How do you do, Miss Kitten? Is she asleep or awake?" The maid replied, "I neither sleep nor wake. Would you know my business? Beer and butter both I make. Come and be my guest." "I'm obliged, Miss Kitten," said the young fox. "But how is Mrs. Fox?" The maid replied, "She sits in her chamber, weeping so sore, her eyes red with crying. Mr. Fox is no more." "Tell her then, my maiden, that a young fox is here, who wishes to marry her," said he. So the cat went pit-pat, pit-a-pat, up the stairs, and tapped gently at the door, saying, "Are you there, Madam Fox?" "Yes, my good little cat," was the reply. "There is a suitor below." "What does he look like?" asked the mistress. "Has he 9 as beautiful tails as my late husband?" "Oh, no," answered the maid. "He has only 1. "Then I will not have him,"
said the mistress. The young cat went down and sent away the suitor, and soon after there came a second knock at the door from another fox with 2 tails, who wished to marry the widow. He fared, however, no better than the former one. Afterwards came 6 more, one after the other, each having 1 tail more than he who preceded him. But these were all turned away. At last there arrived a fox with 9 tails, like the deceased husband, and when the widow heard of it, she said, full of joy, to the cat, "Now you may open all the windows and doors, and turn the old fox out of the house." But just as the wedding was about to be celebrated, the old fox roused himself from his sleep beneath the bench, and drubbed the whole rabble, together with his wife, out of the house, and hunted them far away. Thus ends the first tale of the wedding of Mrs. Fox. I mean, you have a really nice narrative. Thank you. I try. Yeah, it certainly sounded like Kitsune. Either that or a 9 tails. Then the suitors just started evolving. A second account narrates that when the old fox appeared dead, the wolf came as a suitor and knocked at the door, and the cat, who served as servant to the good widow, got up to see who was there. "Good day, Miss Cat. How does it happen that you are sitting all alone? What good are you about?" The cat answered, "I have been making some bread and milk. Will my lord be my guest?" "Thanks, many thanks," replied the wolf. "Is Madam Fox not at home?" The cat sung, "She sits in her chamber, weeping so sore, her eyes red with crying, Mr. Fox is no more." Then the wolf said, "If she wishes for another husband, she had better come down to me." So the cat ran up the stairs, her tail trailing behind, and when she got to the chamber door, she knocked 5 times and asked, "Is Madam Fox at home? If so, and she wishes to have another husband, she must come downstairs." Mrs. Fox asked, "Does the gentleman wear red stockings, and has he a pointed mouth?" "No," replied the cat. "Then he will not do for me," said Mrs. Fox, and shut the door. After the wolf had been turned away, there came a dog, a stag, a hare, a bear, a lion, and all the beasts of the forest, one after another. But each one was deficient of the particular qualities which the old fox had possessed, and the cat was obliged therefore to turn away every suitor. At last came a young fox, and when the question was asked whether he had red stockings and a pointed mouth, the cat replied, "Yes," and she was bid to call him up and prepare for the wedding. Then they threw the old fox out the window, and the cat caught and ate as many mice as she could, in celebration of the happy event. And after the marriage they had a grand ball, and, as I have never heard to the contrary, perhaps they are dancing still. Thus ends the wedding of Mrs. Fox. My first Mitsubishi! On Tuesday was my 1-year anniversary. Stupid autocorrect. Yep. It gets everyone. But yeah, I've been streaming for a year. So all independent, all me. With Suzu being my stalwart waifu moderator. And I hers. Not waifu though. This next story is entitled The Little Elves.
I'm your wife.
What? You're not my wife?
I'm not your wife, you're my wife. Oh, hi, honey, how was work? Pretty good, but I quit my job. You can't quit, you're fired.
ASDF. Is that what it was? ASD, yeah, ASDF. ASFD, something like that. Anyway, let us continue. The Little Elves by the Brothers Grimm. First story. There was once a shoemaker who, from no fault of his own, had become so poor that at last he had nothing left but just sufficient leather for one pair of shoes. In the evening he cut out leather, intending to make it up in the morning, and, as he had a good conscience, he lay quietly down to sleep, first commending himself to God. In the morning he said his prayers, and then sat down to work. But behold, the pair of shoes was already made, and there they stood upon his board. The poor man was amazed, and knew not what to say, but he took the shoes into his hand to look at them more closely, and they were so neatly worked that not a stitch was done wrong, just as if they had been done for a prize. Presently a customer came in, and because the shoes pleased him very much, he paid down more than was usual, and so much that the shoemaker was able to buy with it leather for 2 pairs. By evening he had got his leather shaped out, and when he arose the next morning he prepared to work with fresh spirit. But there was no need, for the shoes stood all perfect on his board. He did not want either for customers, for 2 came who paid him so liberally for the shoes that he bought with the money material for 4 pairs more. These also, when he awoke, he found already made, and so it continued. What he cut out overnight was, in the morning, turned into the neatest shoes possible. This went on until he had regained his former appearance, and was even becoming a prosperous man. One evening, not long before Christmas, as he had cut out the usual quantity, he said to his wife before going to bed, "What say you to stopping up this night to see who it is that helps us so kindly?" His wife was satisfied, and fastened up a light, and then they hid themselves in the corner of the room, where hung some clothes which concealed them. As soon as it was midnight, in came 2 little mannikins, who squatted down on the board, and, taking up the prepared work, set to it with their little fingers, stitching and sewing and hammering so swiftly and lightly that the shoemaker could not take his eyes off them for astonishment. They did not cease until all was brought to an end, and the shoes stood ready on the table, and then they sprang quickly away. The following morning the wife said, "The little men have made us rich, and we must show our gratitude to them, for although they run about, they must be cold, for they have nothing on their bodies. I will make a little shirt, coat,
waistcoat, trousers, and stockings for each. And do you make a pair of shoes for each?"
The husband assented, and one evening, when all was ready, they laid presents instead of the usual work on the board, and hid themselves to see the result. At midnight, in came the elves, jumping about, and soon prepared to work. But when they saw no leather, but the natty little clothes, they at first were astonished, but soon showed their rapturous glee. They drew on their coats, and, smoothing them down, sang, "Smart and natty boys we are, shoemakers we'll no longer be." And so they went on hopping and jumping over the stools and chairs, and at last at the door. After that evening they did not come again, but the shoemaker prospered in all he undertook, and lived happily to the end of his days. Thus ends the first story of the Little Elves. Second story. Once upon a time there was a poor servant girl who was both industrious and cleanly, for every day she dusted the house and shook out the sweepings on a great heap before the door. One morning, just as she was going to throw them away, she saw a letter lying among them, and, as she could not read, she put her broom in a corner and took it to her master. It contained an invitation from the elves, asking the girl to stand godmother to one of their children. The girl did not know what to do, but at last, after much consideration, she consented, for the little men will not easily take a refusal. So there came 3 elves, who conducted her to a hollow mountain where they lived. Everything was very small, of course, but all more neat and elegant than I can tell you. The mother lay in a bed of ebony studded with pearls, and the coverings were all wrought with gold. The cradle was made of ivory, and the bath was of gold. The girl stood godmother, and afterwards wished to return home, but the little elves pressed her earnestly to stay 3 days longer. So she remained, passing the time in pleasure and play, for the elves behaved very kindly to her. At the end of the time she prepared to return home, but first they filled her pockets full of gold, and then led her out of the hill. As soon as she reached the house, she took the broom, which still stood in the corner, and went on with her sweeping, and presently out of the house came some strange people, who asked her who she was, and what she was doing there. Then she found out that it was not 3 days, as she had supposed, but 7 years that had passed with the little elves in the hill, and that her former master had died in her absence. Thus ends the second story. Yeah, don't spend any time in Fae. In Elysium, I believe, the land of milk and honey. The third story. The little elves once stole a child out of its cradle and put in its place a changeling with a clumsy head and red eyes, who would neither eat nor drink. The mother, in great trouble, went to a neighbor to ask her advice, and she advised her to carry the changeling into the kitchen, set it on the hearth, and boil water in 2 eggshells. If the changeling was made to laugh, then all was up with him. The woman did as the neighbor said, and as she set the eggshells over the fire, the creature sung out, "Though I am as old as the oldest tree, cooking in an eggshell never did I see." Then it burst into a hoarse laugh. While he was laughing, a number of little elves entered, bringing the real child, whom they placed on the hearth, and then they took away the changeling with them. Thus ends the third story of the little elves. That was weird. Like, oh, you did something weird. Okay, well, we'll take the kid back. Sorry. I just find that pretty funny. This next, you found us out. We're sorry. We won't do it again. To you. Oh, and yes, that fox was rather picky. Yeah, a wolf was too good for her. This next one is entitled "The Robber Bridegroom." Yeah, Fey elves are not very good, to say the least. They steal children, and they switch them out with changelings, and trap you in the dreaming for much, much longer than you actually are there. The Robber Bridegroom by the brothers Grimm. There was once a miller who had a beautiful daughter, whom he much wished to see well married. Not long after, there came a man who appeared very rich, and the miller, not knowing anything to his disadvantage, promised his daughter to him. The maiden, however, did not take a fancy to this suitor, nor could she love him as a bride should, and, moreover, she had no confidence in him, but as often as she looked at him, or thought about him, her heart sank within her. Once he said to her, "You are my bride, yet you never visit me." The maiden answered, "I do not know where your house is." "It is deep in the shades of the forest," said the man. Then the maiden tried to excuse herself by saying she should not be able to find it. But the bridegroom said, "Next Sunday you must come and visit me. I have already invited guests, and in order that you may find your way through the forest, I will strew the path with ashes." When Sunday came, the maiden prepared to set out, but she felt very anxious, and knew not why. And, in order that she might know her way back, she filled her pockets with beans and peas. These she threw to the right and left of the path of ashes, which she followed till it led her into the thickest part of the forest. There she came to a solitary house, which looked so gloomy and desolate that she felt quite miserable. She went in, but no one was there, and the most profound quiet reigned throughout. Suddenly a voice sang, "Return, fair maid, return to your home. 'Tis to a murderer's den you've come." The maiden looked round and perceived that it was a bird in a cage against the wall, which sang the words. Once more it uttered them. "Return, fair maid, return to your home. 'Tis to a murderer's den you've come." Now the maiden went from one room to the other, through the whole house, but all were empty, and not a human being was to be seen anywhere. At last she went into the cellar, and there sat a withered old woman, shaking her head. "Can you tell me," asked the maiden,
whether my bridegroom lives in this house."
"Ah, poor girl," said the old woman. "When are you to be married? You are in a murderer's den. You think to be a bride and to celebrate your wedding, but you only wed with death. See here, I have a great cauldron filled with water, and if you fall into their power, they will kill you without mercy, cook and eat you, for they are cannibals. If I do not have compassion and save you, you are lost." So saying, the old woman led her behind a great cask, where no one could see her. "Be still as a mouse," said she, "and don't move hand or foot, or all is lost. At night, when the robbers are asleep, we will escape. I have long sought an opportunity." She had scarcely finished speaking when the wicked band returned, dragging with them a poor girl, to whose shrieks and cries they paid no attention. They gave her some wine to drink, 3 glasses, 1 white, 1 red, and 1 yellow, and at the last she fell down in a swoon. Then they tore off her fine clothes, chopped her beautiful body into pieces, and sprinkled them with salt. Meanwhile, the poor bride behind the cask trembled and shuddered to see what fate would have been hers. Presently, one of the robbers remarked a gold ring on the finger of the murdered girl, and, as she could not draw it off easily, he took a hatchet and chopped off the finger. But the finger, with the force of the blow, flew up and fell behind the cask, right into the lap of the bride, and the robber, taking a light, went to seek it, but could not find it. Then one of the others asked, "Have you looked behind the cask?" "Oh, do come and eat," cried the old woman in a fright. "Come and eat, and leave your search till morning. The finger will not run away." "The old woman is right," said the robbers, and, desisting from their search, they sat down to their meal, and the old woman mixed with their drink a sleeping draught, so that presently they lay down to sleep on the floor and snored away. As soon as the bride heard them, she came from behind the cask and stepped carefully over the sleepers, who lay side by side, fearing to awake any of them. Heaven helped her in her trouble, and she got over this difficulty well. The old woman stared up too, and opened the door. And then they made as much haste as they could out of the murderer's den. The wind had blown away the ashes, but the beans and peas the bride had scattered in the morning had sprouted up, and now showed the path in the moonlight. All night long they walked on, and by sunrise they came to the mill, and the poor girl narrated her adventures to her father, the miller. Now, when the day came that the wedding was to be celebrated, the bridegroom appeared, and the miller gathered together all his relations and friends. While they sat at table, each kept telling some tale, but the bride sat silent, listening. Presently the bridegroom said, "Can you not tell us something, my heart? Do not you know of anything to tell?"
"Yes," she replied. "I will tell you a dream of mine. I thought I went through a wood, and by I arrived at a house wherein there was not a human being, but on the wall there hung a bird in a cage, who sang, 'Return, fair maid, return to your home. 'Tis to a murderer's den you've come.' And it sang this twice. My treasure, thus dreamed I. Then I went through all the rooms, and every one was empty and desolate, and at last I stepped down into the cellar, and there sat a very old woman, shaking her head from side to side. I asked her, "Does my bridegroom dwell in this house?" And she replied, "Ah, dear child, you have fallen into a murderer's den. Thy lover does not dwell here, but he will kill you, and then he'll cook and eat you. My treasure," thus dreamed I. Then I thought that the old woman hid me behind a great cask, and scarcely had she done so than when the robbers came home, dragging a maiden with them, to whom they gave 3 glasses of wine, one red, one white, and one yellow, and at the third her heart snapped. They pulled off her fine clothes, chopped her beautiful body into pieces, and sprinkled them with salt. My treasure, thus dreamed I. Then one of the robbers saw a gold ring on her finger, and because he could not draw it off, he took up a hatchet and hewed at it, and the finger flew up and fell behind the cask into my lap, and there is the finger with the ring. With these words she drew it out. She threw it down before him and showed it to all present. The robber, who during her narration had become pale as death, now sprang up and would have escaped, but the guests held him and delivered him up to the judges, and soon afterward he and his whole band were condemned to death for their wicked deeds. Thus ends The Robber Bridegroom. That was a bit graphic than the other ones kind of used to today. Except for the guy living, peacefully with his wife for a number of years until all of a sudden, it gets found out that he was lying and gets thrown into a sack and drowned. Oh, shit. Yeah. Yeah, she wasted an opportunity to just end it right there with just, they're all asleep and snoring so loudly that I don't think they're going to wake up ever. They hack her body into pieces. Like, wait, what? Yeah, that happened. They ate a person, supposedly. Although it didn't mention that they ate her specifically. They just ate.
Why did they sprinkle the body with salt? It's a waste of salt.
Well, they sprinkled the body with salt to, preserve it. Because, that's how you did it without, refrigeration. You toss salt on everything. It dried everything out, and it didn't allow bacteria to, grow very much. So people stayed healthier. They just had to eat a ton of sodium. This next story is entitled Herr Korbels. So let me change the title real quick. Oh, Korbes. Herr Korbes. After this one, chat, I think I'm going to call it for the evening. It's getting a little late. But I hope you all will enjoy your weekend. Leaving this with your final story for the evening. Herr Korbes by the brothers Grimm. There once lived a cock and a hen who agreed to set out on their travels together. The cock, therefore, brought a smart carriage, which had 4 red wheels, and to which he harnessed 4 little mice. And then the hen got inside along with him, and they set off together. They had not gone far when they met a cat, who asked them where they were going.
the cock answered. To Herr Corbe's. Will you take me with you? Said the cat. Oh, yes, willingly. But get up behind, for you might fall out in front, and take care that you do not dirty my red wheels, replied the cock. And then he cried, Now turn away, little wheels, and hurry on, little mice, or we shall be too late to find Herr Corbes at home. On the road there afterwards came a grindstone, a pin, an egg, a duck, and, last of all, a needle. And every one mounted into the carriage and went on with it. When they arrived at the house, Herr Corbes was not at home, so the mice drew the carriage into the barn. The cock and hen flew on to a perch. The cat seated herself on the hearth. The duck perched on a water butt. The egg wrapped itself up in a towel. The pin hid itself in the cushion of a chair. The needle jumped on the bed and buried itself in the pillow, and the grindstone placed itself just over the door. Soon afterwards, Herr Corbes returned, and going to the hearth, poked the fire. Then the cat threw the ashes in his face. He ran to the kitchen to wash himself, and the duck spirted water into his eyes. So he took up the towel to wipe them, and the egg broke and ran about over his chin. All these mishaps made him feel tired, and he dropped into a chair to rest himself. But the pin was there before him, and made him jump up in a rage and throw himself on the bed, where the needle in the pillow pricked him so that he shouted with pain, and ran in a terrible wrath out of the room. Just as he got to the door, the stone fell down on his head and knocked him down on the spot. So we conclude that this Herr Corbes must have been a very bad man. Thus ends Herr Corbes. Either he was very bad or he was very unfortunate, chat. But regardless, that would suck. To have all these strangers just enter your home and then cause you a bunch of misfortune. But with that, we're going to end stream. I'm going to find somebody to raid into. So let me see whom we can raid. Oh, Sayako. Thank you for following. So let us see now. Mama Oko is also is just chatting, dragging at Mizutamari DVT through Warframe with Chris Chan ASMR. That sounds interesting. So we're going to go check out Mama Oko on the Twitch side. Let's give a quick shout out to them. And I think that worked well enough. All right. So I want to thank you all for coming out and hearing some Brothers Grimm.
I will be live again on Monday evening, where we will probably play some Claire Obscure, as I've been playing that. Then Wednesday, Marvel Rivals. And Fridays, as always, is Campfire Fair Use Friday, where we read some great stories. So, thank you again for coming out, and I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.